Yeah.
And then we'll wait and they'll see it.
And they'll see it up there. People will see it on the screen. It's a little tough, but a little different. But
Is that Thomas there?
it is tough. Yep. That is not Mark next to.
Is that Mark Stanley?
Is that their volume?
Are we good? We good? Okay. In place of a gavel, we're going to call this meeting of CPDC to order.
Right.
Can you? Hello? Is that, can you? How about now? All right, all right. New forum, new technology here. All right. So are we good on Zoom?
I think we're good on Zoom. It's up and running.
All right, great. So calling this meeting of CPDC to order. Thanks for everyone for coming. It's a good crowd, and I think if you came to the last one, hopefully a bit of a more comfortable space, certainly bigger. So, so I think this is going to work out a bit better. So I think where we're going to start, right? We have a number of things to go over tonight. We have the proposal that town staff and CPDC put together, which right is focused on the residential district, and we want to get through tonight some of the details associated with that proposal. We, you know, at the last hearing on this, right, we got a lot of feedback specifically on the map, the extent of the map, how, you know, the extent of the area being proposed to be rezoned. We also had some proposals or a discussion on whether it should even be in that sort of general downtown area and looking at other zones. We did get proposals from some folks on other places in town to look, and we do later on this evening, we do want to take a look at those proposals and talk through those. We're going to start on the proposal that's sort of, I'm going to say, on the table that we had worked out. So we're going to work, it's a little bit dry, right, on the zoning language to really get an understanding of what that proposal is. But we will also, as I mentioned, right, sort of open it up and have the bigger discussion about whether there's other proposals that we should expand upon, build, get rid of the one that we have on the table, you know, where we go with that. And at that point, I think we'll probably have a wider discussion.
Great.
Is that what?
Yeah, no, I think
that's
that
what we're
works
talking about.
perfect. I think that's what we've talked about, and I can try to. So I'm Andrew McNichol, Community Development Director for the town of Reading. Just some protocols for the meeting as we try to keep it formatted. This is a hybrid setup. We're new to this room, but managing it the same as we have in the previous efforts. So if you haven't seen the sign-in sheet for those here in person on the small gray table, if you could please sign in if you haven't already done so. We're tracking those on Zoom. When we have public comment period, I think we're open to public comment throughout the night as it makes sense. When we're in the bylaw language itself, if we can try to keep questions and comments to those areas that we're discussing, and then as we continue on to that broader discussion, right, that discussion will open up as well. For those on Zoom, we're going to ask that you use the raise hand feature found under reactions, or if you have your video on, you can raise your hand and we'll try to flag you down. That way we can ask you to unmute. We've been Zoom bombed a few times, so we have to ask you to unmute, which then you will be able to ask your comment or question once acknowledged. For those in person here, please raise your hand so you can get acknowledged. We're going to ask you to try to come up to the podium so that those on Zoom can clearly hear you as you speak into the mic for your comment or question. On your first public comment period, please, for all attendees tonight, state your name and address for the public record so we can track that. Outside of that, this meeting is being broadcasted by RCTV on local channels and will be published to their YouTube. Here in person tonight, we have Chair John Weston, Vice Chair Tony D'Arezzo, Heather Klisch and Hillary Mative, and on Zoom we have members Tom Armstrong and Mark Wetzel. They are here tonight, so just remotely. So I think from there we are ready to roll, and I can share screen.
All right.
Okay. So as John had previously mentioned, we were going to start with the bylaw tonight to get an understanding of how the current proposal fits into the bylaw and some of the regulation language around it. We're going to jump around a bit in the bylaw. We're not going to go in chronological order. We're going to try to tackle it in the most meat of it to begin with, which comes down to the dimensional controls, the affordability, and the use regulations. And then we can jump to parking definitions and any other areas of the bylaw that have proposed slight amendments within them. But the meat and potatoes is really within that use regulations and the district controls. So I'm going to share my screen. It's a Word doc. It's a living document. It's in track changes currently. You can see in color is what's being proposed. Any strike throughs is what's proposed to be deleted. And all black and white text is existing language already. So we're going to start at section 5, which is the use regulations in the bylaw. Yep. Yep. Yeah. All right. Maybe we go one more. I'll keep going. Okay. And I'm happy to read some of the language as well for discussion. So section 5 in our zoning bylaw is separated into multiple sections, and section 5 is the use regulations. And this has the use parameters as well as the table of controls, both for commercial districts and residential districts. You'll see as we work through this, we're really focused on the primary residence table here. So under section 5, there's not major amendments proposed outside of in the table itself, which is table 532, because in the current concept of zoning, we are proposing to amend the existing A40 district and combine it with a budding single-family zoning district area. We have proposed to retitle the zone into mixed residential, which is MR for short in this table. So we called it mixed residential because single-family uses may be allowed, two-family uses may be allowed, as well as multifamily up to a degree, which we'll get into under the controls. But you can see here under the table, we had proposed to change the A40 district simply to the mixed residential title. All of the uses we're really looking for are already allowed in the district, so there's no amendments needed there. It was when we got down into accessory uses, where because this zoning district can allow single, two, or multiple units on a lot. We had thought it might be a good idea under the accessory uses, which regulate accessory apartments, accessory dwelling units, in-law apartments, whatever term you want to call them, the accessory apartments in the bylaw. They're currently a special permit process in the table. In this zone specifically, we had proposed to make them a by right accessory use, given that the two-family uses could be allowed and they don't need to be as strongly regulated as the existing accessory apartment bylaw. So that's a lot of kind of context, right? That's not shared on the screen, the accessory apartment, but we thought that was in line with the proposal. Any comments, questions from the board on that one? That doesn't make sense. Yeah, jump to Chris Haley. John, if you don't mind,
sure.
you got his hand.
Another question on that. It's for the closed caption.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna ask you to come up, right, so that people on Zoom can hear.
Thanks for saying this in 1 minute. So it's a closed caption box as well. That's all I have.
So we just
thank
need
you.
to scroll down just so people can see
It's
it.
like under control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Thank you.
Thanks.
For pointing that out. Okay, great. We will move right along down into accessory uses. This is section 5.4 in the bylaw. There was some language around in a single family district, outdoor storage of seasonal stock firewood, has its regulations around it. We had proposed that we just simply modify this to an any residence district, which in this case would be the single family districts, the proposed mixed residential and the existing A80. This is really just a housekeeping cleanup. We're not changing the regulations or proposing anyone be allowed more square footage for their firewood. I don't think I've heard that need out in town, so I don't assume we would have any questions there, but if you have any, let me know. So this right here, this is section 5.7 is a new proposed subsection to section 5. This is what we call inclusionary zoning, which is really your affordability requirements on any new development in town. So when we talk inclusionary zoning for the proposed district, we don't have inclusionary zoning currently in the bylaw for by right uses like multifamily would be in this proposed district. So we have inclusionary zoning for overlay districts like the smart growth, downtown smart growth district, or the special permit mixed use. But given that we're talking by right allowances, which is required by the law, we thought a new subsection for our primary principal zoning districts was appropriate. So we wanted to establish a new inclusionary zoning, which is regulated under uses because it is a use affordable housing. And we wanted to establish the purpose for the inclusionary zoning, which is really to increase the supply of housing in the town of Reading that is permanently available to and affordable by low and moderate income households, to encourage a greater diversity of housing accommodations to meet the needs of many families, to maintain a satisfactory proportion of the town's housing stock as affordable units, and to achieve the goals set out in the town's long-term visioning plans, including those like the housing production plan and the master plan. So again, when we talk, just to give a little bit of context to inclusionary zoning and capital A affordable units, those are deed restricted affordable units. Typically in perpetuity is the maximum allowance by law today, or up to 30 years. And they're restricted to those earning incomes, household incomes, typically at 80% area median income, which is based on a regional context by the HUD program and the in partnership with an Equitable and Livable Communities Department, the old DHCD. So it's really, in essence, for affordable housing stock, capital A in perpetuity. And that's an important element for the town because we want to maintain affordable housing stock over 10% on what's called your subsidized housing inventory. If you have 10% of your total housing stock as affordable, you are safe harbor from 40Bs. And we can get a bit more into this in the presentation as well, where Reading is at and where we're projecting to go potentially from here. Sorry, I see a hand raised already.
my name's Nancy Zinline, Precinct 5. I'm just curious, this section that you are adding, and it directly relates to the MTA communities law? Is that why it's being added into Reading zone requirements?
So the MBTA communities law does not require you to have affordable components in your zoning. If you do have affordable components,
So
yeah.
this is separate. This really doesn't have anything to do with the MBTA community requirements.
that
Is
is
that
correct. Yes, that
Okay,
is.
thank you.
I think right, I do think there's a little bit nuanced answer.
Yeah.
Right, because what we'd like to do, right, I think it was discussed in our last hearing is, right, make sure that we don't, I'm gonna say, fall behind in terms of our affordability housing goal of 10% and open up the town to more 40B development. And so by including in some way, shape, or form, inclusionary zoning component to this zone, right, would allow for affordable housing, dedicated affordable housing that gets factored into that formula. And so it's not required for the MBTA communities. But it would allow us, it is allowed, and it would allow us to, I'm going to say, not fall behind as more housing was developed in town.
Right. Sorry, I see another hand. Yes. Yep.
And my recollection was that this is something that, sorry, my recollection, is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. My recollection was that this is something that we heard from the community, both in the hearing and in written comments, of wanting to ensure that there is some affordability component to the bylaw update that we end up bringing to town meeting.
Yeah, I'm not a very question. So my question is, why just 10%? You look at other towns and you see how Lexington has 15, you see Newton at 15 or higher with incentives. So why just 10?
So we haven't gotten to the specific controls yet of the affordability, jumping a little ahead, but what we're proposing is a 10% requirement for projects at 10 units or more, because that's what's allowed by right in the law. So if you want to exceed the 10% requirement, it requires an economic feasibility analysis to be done by.
Don't you think it's a good idea to do such an analysis with county? She's speaking. Sorry, wouldn't it be a good idea to do such an analysis?
So we can do the analysis if it's desired. What we're seeing, right, and we haven't gotten there yet again, but a lot of what the controls are kind of limit unit sizes and scale to a varying degree. And when you're limiting the density, you don't want to go too far on affordability requirements because it can make a project economically infeasible at times. And where we're saying, right, anywhere we have a variety of units allowed based on lot size, but we felt that a 10% was appropriate in this case in the by right essence, right, to promote at least a required aspect of inclusionary zoning. And if we jump ahead, we were considering additional affordable incentives, right, increased affordable incentives, whether that be more units at 80% AMI, or deeper units, say 50% average median income. If you could do units at that rate, we were considering, right, if we wanted more inclusionary aspects to the developments, would we give a little on the dimensional controls or review process to incentivize those units and higher rates further? So we're jumping ahead just a little bit, and we can get to that in just
So what I would like to see, if you have it, is when you show us the maps, if you publish, if you can make an estimate how many affordable units you expect to get, because lots are very small. So you
Right.
don't have such an estimate for the very don't want to fall behind, as the chairman said.
Thank you. So this was just our drafted purpose right here, section 571. Oh, what happened? Okay, we're back. So this was just our drafted purpose, right? We're happy to add to that or wordsmith that in any fashion, certainly with the board and with your guys' help. I'm sure there's a plethora of options we could say as the purpose. We're just trying to keep it condensed and concise. When we talk the administration and standards of the inclusionary zoning requirements, we want to make sure, right, as we get any plan review process and pre-permitting applications, that we're getting draft use restrictions and regulatory agreements to ensure that any deed restrictions are meeting what we're asking for, including the time length of the affordability and the allowance in the deed restriction, whether that's 80% households, 50% households, or other. So when the development comes in, that's something we would get upfront to review and ensure that prior to occupancy that regulatory agreement is recorded and established in place. So that was just under administration. We'd also ask the applicants to submit a site approval letter from the subsidizing agency authorized by ELC, we'll call them for short. They're the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. They really do a lot of monitoring to ensure any residents of those affordable units qualify for those affordable units and remain qualified going forward. There can sometimes be third-party monitoring, but we would expect that up front. We will also, right, under administration, staff administration typically, we also look to make sure that comparable rate of affordable units are receiving occupancy at the same time as market rate units, so that someone isn't just building out their market rate units and getting them all occupancy and the affordable units lag behind if ever get occupancy. So we always make sure that, right, it's an equal value in both the affordable units getting occupancy and the market rate units getting occupancy. So that's really administrative for staff to handle, but it's certainly good to clarify up front to any applicants going through this. Any questions so far on this image?
Yes, quick clarification, these couple terms, average median income, median income, I heard area median income.
Sorry, they can get interchangeable, and I do talk a lot in jargon, I apologize. It is area median income based on the regional averages.
So what is that? What is that number? I know the median income, the rate is about 154,000. The state is about 86,000.
In the region, and this really varies based on household allowances and anybody applying, but it can range from 75, 80,000 upwards to like 110, 120,000. Again, it's based on household size and household allowance in the units, so it's hard to give the exact number, but it's typically within that range.
So if we're talking that type of number, we're talking about basically most of the affordable housing rate being 4, 6, or 7 times. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
Maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yep.
I don't see how it wouldn't be that way over a period of time that we're looking at 5 years.
Yep. So as mentioned, right, the smart growth district, both downtown and at the end of Main Street, allow affordable development. South Main Street mixed use has affordable requirements. There's housing authority properties spread across the town that are affordable. There's Johnson Woods, which has affordable units in them up on the north end of town. So right, our zoning district, because of potential unit allowances, we wanted to capture more affordable units in them if we can. Not every unit is affordable, but the development that would trigger, as we'll get there in a second, would require some affordable components. Hope that answered your question. So we have certain standards, right, of affordable units, which is really that they're comparable to market rate units, both in design, construction, and quality, and that they are dispersed proportionately throughout the development. And typically, right, if that's on multiple floors, making sure that bedroom sizes are adequate, right, and comparable. There's a variety there of affordable units if there's varying bedroom sizes. So really, again, staff administration in affordable housing to make sure that those are met. But we wanted to include zoning language so that's clear and concise both for the public, for CPDC, for applicants, and for staff going forward. So here's where we get into the district requirements and where it can be applied. So we had, again, proposed that affordable units be required in projects located in the mixed residential zone as follows: 10% of dwelling units constructed in a project of 10 or more, whether rental or ownership. This applies to new construction and to projects involving the substantial rehab, expansion, reconstruction, or conversion of existing structures that increases the number of residential units to 10 or more units. You can't divide or phase the project to avoid this requirement. Affordable units, typical of inclusionary, standard inclusionary, that in this case, all the affordable units required shall be made affordable to households earning at or below 80% of the area median income, as determined annually by the Housing and Urban Development Program, as well as in partnership with ELC, who again regulates and monitors occupancy and a number of things for affordable housing. So this was an important language. I think it gets back to the note about requiring more than 10%. So we had to include language at this point in time that where the computation of required affordable dwelling units results in a fractional number that gets rounded downwards. And the reason we had to do that was, at least currently, is because again, the state says you can't do more than 10% without a feasibility study. And so, right, if we said call it 18 units or 16 units, I think, at 1.6, you might expect that to typically round up to 2 affordable units. But in essence, what that becomes is a 1 out of 8 requirement, which is a 12.5% requirement, not a 10% requirement. And so we couldn't include that language of rounding up because the state says you have to keep it at 10% or below without that study. So in its current iteration, we've proposed rounding down on fractional units in this case. So proposed developments, and this is where, right, this gets back to the town discussion and really what is our main question for both the board and the public in terms of the inclusionary zoning of this bylaw and this district. So we had considered, right, because we likely want more than the 10%, and we likely, especially if we can't round up, we don't want to fall too far behind. This zone, again, is not the only place housing gets developed. I just want you to keep in mind, but we wanted to see if there was appetite for, I guess, to allow for incentives for additional affordable units. So we were considering language that you see here on the screen that proposed developments of any unit size, right? It could be 4, 5, 8, 10, anything less than 10, more than 10, may provide, not required to provide, but may provide additional affordable units or deeper and more broadable affordable units, which is typically that 50% area median income allowance, at the following rates in exchange for additional flexibility in dimensional controls, which we haven't touched on just yet, but we'll get to. But we're proposing language that projects that provide at least 20% of affordable units. So a lot of the lots in the district can do up to, a vast majority of lots are allowed up to 5 units. So we were thinking in the essence of 1 out of 5 units if we could get. That keeps us ahead of the 10% requirement. It also helps promote potential more affordable smaller units. But if we could get 20% of dwelling units constructed as affordable units to 80% area median income, so that's an increase from the 10% up to 20%. the development would be allowed up to a maximum of 40% lot coverage, where we're proposing 30%. And, you know, when we had gone through incentives for potential more affordable housing, because affordable housing is a good goal for the town, and in this district, we really weren't looking to propose increase in height, decrease in setbacks, less parking, less open space, right? Those are all viable assets and good goals as well. And so the most limiting factor can be lot coverage in our district. So we're considering that if we could allow a slight increase in that to get more affordable units, would we do that? I think we're open to the discussion of if there are incentives, if that's a true need, what are they? Or is it just a typical waiver review process? Or do we want to be very prescriptive with what we're allowing for? So
I have a comment on this. Thank you so much, Andrew. The way you describe it, it becomes very understandable. I don't know if mine's on.
there we go.
There. Now can you hear me? Okay, good. I thank you. The way you describe it is very understandable. I will just flag, and I'd be interested in what others have to say. I am not so sure I am in support of trading affordability for greater lot coverage. And we're not talking about the maps right now, but especially in the areas as mapped out. Please, I'm not doing this for applause. I'm doing it to get my point across. And my reason is this, is that environmental justice communities are defined, one of the definitions of an environmental justice community is defined at 65% or below the median income. And I know that's, there are calculations that go into that. In the areas that we are defining so far, many of those are actually not in great, some are, but many of the areas are not in great proximity to open space and green areas. And there's so much effort, and maybe there's not, there's a lot of effort right now in decreasing the disparities that people who are of lower income or who are environmental justice neighborhoods, the proximity that they have to green space and trees. I have a great concern that if we were to trade lot coverage and especially some of the areas that we have now where trees and green space are kind of at a premium, if we trade lot coverage for deep affordability, more deeper affordability, that we're just exacerbating some of those discrepancies that a greater community of people are actually trying to repair.
Thank you. So one thing I did want to note, right, I just looked it up, right, we have somewhere around 900 units
Yep.
or so of affordable housing, deed restricted affordable housing in Reading. So just to give a perspective of the rest of those developments that you mentioned, what those total. I guess I would not necessarily be in favor of that trade-off of increased density. I think, right, we've got a delicate balance here to fit the housing as it is within the character of the neighborhood, and I would hope that we could find other ways of creating that affordable housing in town, and don't want to trade the character of the neighborhood for that.
I agree. We've been very cognizant of everything we've proposed has been trying to keep in scale with what exists and the controls that exist. So we had just posed this to, I guess, try to see if we can incentivize more housing, but it's certainly not required by any means.
I'm sorry, one more thing. So I was in reading through this language, it talks a lot about projects and about like the phasing of projects. I'm wondering whether we can reframe that to be the actual, the property on the parcel, because, right, we all know, right, that what could happen and is likely to happen is that right, a developer would come in and say, oh, I'm going to build, I'm going to preserve that one unit, or maybe it's 2 units, and build 8. So I don't need to do that. But in essence, having 10 on the property, so they should, right? So it doesn't matter what you're building. It matters what's on the property. Or, right, they could do 5 now and then, 5 later when, I know you said you can't phase it, but, 10 years later, someone will phase it. And it'll get through.
Yeah, no, we could certainly clarify the requirements up here on the screen. I think that's what we were trying to capture through, right, the projects involving all these plethora of options, reconstruction, conversion of existing structures, but we can certainly make that a bit more clear that anything, the totality of the parcel is what's,
All right, given that there are 3 options for incentivizing a developer, you can go larger on the footprint, you can go higher, or you can have more units. Of those 3, really, which one or ones would make most sense for an incentive?
I'm
Obviously-
honest, it's more units, but we didn't want to,
Well, if you do more units, you end up with more parking, which in effect is
more costs.
less green space.
Yeah.
I would, in my mind, I would rather that the developer be able to build slightly larger units that are affordable, where he might be able to put in a 3-bedroom instead of a 2-bedroom, not have to incur the extra parking, and actually have a family there, as opposed to putting in a larger 2-bedroom or an extra 2-bedroom and then extra, and lose the space or the green space with parking. That's just one of the trade-offs we're thinking about.
See a hand back there, and then was there a hand here?
I just have a quick question. Is there any reason why in the affordable units, the language is required in projects located in the mixed residential zone and not required throughout all of Reading? Why is it just required in the mixed residential use zone?
So this section of the bylaw was specific to principal zones and not overlay zones and to by right uses. And this current proposed district would be the lone viable multifamily mixed residential left, right? We have inclusionary, as I mentioned, on South Main Street for mixed use properties. We don't have it for multifamily specific there, but where we are proposing this zoning concept in this zoning district, we wanted to keep language specific to this for now as we review those other zones, probably more likely in the future or even potentially sooner rather than later.
So just for clarity, Andrew, could you review for everybody where, if this were added, where are all of the areas that this inclusionary zoning to encourage affordable housing would apply? And I'm just pausing there for clarity because we're talking about a zone, and you've mentioned that in town, on top of our zoning, we have several overlay districts where affordable housing is incentivized, and it gets a little confusing. So just kind of, you did it once already, I know, but if this were to be accepted, where are all the places that zoning would encourage affordable housing?
Give me 1 second here I'm going to pull up our existing zoning map. I don't have access to my server. My VPN doesn't seem to be working, but I'll pull up the existing zoning districts, point to areas that have affordable, and then the general area where this district is, so I can pull up the map. So just right here on the Town Public GIS, which is a great tool if you aren't aware of it, you can turn the zoning layer on Everything in pink and purple is single family zoning, S15 or S20 or S40. The green is typical of your business zones, business B downtown here and business A down South Main Street. Brown is your industrial zoning district down along Walker's Brook Drive. And the blue is existing apartment 40 zones and apartment 80 down here. And there's a few other overlays in and around, but in terms of where affordable units are allowed for development or required for development currently. So the smart growth district overlay over your downtown district is option 1. We've gotten a strong amount of affordable units added to the SHI through 40R zoning downtown. Similarly, down here towards the south end of town, this is a separate smart growth district, the Gateway Smart Growth District. That's home to Reading Woods, and that had a good amount of affordable units constructed in it during that project and plan review. Down South Main Street here is where our 2019 mixed use bylaw and regulations were enacted, and that requires 10% of any mixed use project with residential units to be affordable. We have, right outside of that, there's a few other oddballs, I'll call them. Johnson Woods has affordable units up in the northwest quadrant of town. There's other housing authority properties scattered across the town. The housing authority properties are located just off of Washington Street and behind the schools, as well as behind Main Street down here. So there's a lot of affordable units dispersed across the town. In our district, right, we're focused on the half mile around the depot. I think a lot of people are familiar with the current iteration of the map, so that's where we would be proposing another zone that could allow for affordable development, and we can get to the controls pretty soon and when that would be triggered on the lot sizes.
Thank you. Was there another question? Sure.
Yeah.
Colleen Detail, 17 High Street. You mentioned 900 and something current units. What percentage, what are we close to 10%?
We're around 10%?
We are.
I think you mentioned something like 9.6 or something.
So we are, so we can talk about this now if you guys want to take the time for it. So again, affordable, and we kind of went over the language that we were proposing today, got good feedback, but why is this important? Why is the subsidized housing inventory, the SHI for short, important? So again, just to reiterate, at 10% of total subsidized units based on your total housing stock, a community can achieve safe harbor from 40B development. We want to be proactive and not reactive to affordable housing. So we want to be able to add it as we go with market rate units. What's currently on the SHI is a number of 40B units, a number of 40R units, housing authority units, and those other residential properties I had mentioned. As of July 2023, when the new info was released, we had a total of 9,901 units on the census SHI tract. We currently have 966 SHI units on the inventory, which is 9.76%. So we're just short of 10% now. We need to get to 990 to reach that 10%, which is a pitfall of 24 units. However, Eaton Lakeview 40B is an approved 40B down off of Walker's Brook and Lake at the corner of Lakeview and Eaton. They have phased the project and they had finished phase 1 of the townhomes. Down there is a series of 12 townhomes. There's a remaining of 74 rental units to be built across 3 structures there. Affordable units in SHI, right? It gets tricky in the planning world. Units lapse on, units lapse off. Those 74 units have lapsed off because the applicant and developer has not received a building permit as of yet. So they've currently lapsed off of the SHI until that building permit is issued. As soon as, and we're trying to work with them to try to get a building permit sooner rather than later. It's an approved project. And for us, it means we could immediately apply to get the 74 units back on the SHI and immediately jumps us back over to the 10%, closer to 10.5%. So when we consider it, right, affordable unit development in context with this proposed zoning district, it's important to remember that the SHI denominator, your total housing stock, only changes every 10 years. So if we can get those Eaton Lakeview units back on the SHI over 10%, we're good for a good handful of years until that denominator changes. And that's based on census data, right? Every 10-year census, and then it takes them a few years from there, right? It wasn't released till 2023 in this case, the new denominator. So we have a good handful of years that we can track for and prepare to maintain that 10%, right? Through the rate of by right developments, our permitting software, right? We are always tracking net new units, whether that's subdivision, a tear down of a single family home, or the addition, ADUs are a little separate, addition of a second unit if there is some historical possibility for us. So we're always tracking net new units. Kim Saunders, God bless her, she keeps our department alive in the building department. And then we track all of our affordable unit developments as well as staff to make sure that we're remaining in line with the goals for the census and maintaining that 10%. So, right, this zoning concept and district is gonna could add a handful of affordable units. It could add a handful more market rate units, or if we incentivize any option in between the two. Again, it's not the only area of town for affordable housing development requirements, nor does it have to be. So those are options we can work through, but it's just important to keep all of that in mind. There's a lot of ins and outs of affordable housing and their deed restrictions. So
Sure.
I'm Christopher Carroll, 57 Board Street in Reading. Thank you, Andrew, for learning all this stuff and being so knowledgeable. This is a lot of stuff to keep track of. I don't want to go too far into the weeds here, because I know that most of the people here really want to see what this downtown NBTA community district is going to look like and what the potential is for new housing there. You know, those are the minimum we need to get. But I can't help but ask, I look at this stuff in the affordable housing. We all know that most of us, hopefully, our incomes go up. So someone who might be in that lower income group when they're 22 and could qualify for the affordable housing, by the time they're in their 30s, they're probably going to be out of there. They're probably going to be making above the median and not 80% or less of the median. If somebody moves into one of these houses and their income goes up, is there someone who comes along and says, you got to leave now because you make too much money? How does that get monitored over time? Or once you're in there, do you get to stay even if you now have an income which is, you know, quite ample?
yeah, so great question. It can always, there's a little, right, dependency there on each situation, but in general, there are annual monitoring compliance practices, both through the Office of ELC and through third-party monitoring agreements that we establish with the developments as these new developments come online. And the monitoring agent's responsibility is to ensure that those residents, either rental or home ownership, remain qualified for their unit, and they do a lot of deep diving into that to make sure if someone is out of compliance, they'll work with them on the process to either transfer, find a new unit, or find a new buyer, purchaser, renter, etc. So it's not as like I guess for lack of a better term, an eviction process. They work with them and figure it out to make sure. So the home ownership units are a bit more complicated, right? And then when you resale, you're only allowed a certain percentage of increases or profit and all of these things. So there's a lot of nuance there, but in general, there's annual compliance monitoring to ensure residents remain qualified. Great question.
Mr. Chairman, I believe Gail online had their hand up.
Thank you. And ask Gail to unmute. Hi, Gail. I think you should be able to go ahead.
Oh, hi. Let me turn this up.
Oh, I am not able to hear you, Gail. I don't know if your microphone on your computer is enabled.
Is this better?
Oh,
Is this better?
sorry, can you try again, Gail? Can you try speaking, Gail?
Hello, 1, 2, 3.
Here we go.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have lots of questions. I'm on Mount Vernon Street. We already get the commuters parking on our street, or trying to. But that being said, I moved into this town because I wanted to get out of the city and I wanted to have more space. And I feel like it's starting to encroach and get crowded with these mansionized houses, with these apartments, with these condos all getting built up near the station. And it's losing the neighborhood community feel.
So I'm sorry, I hate to cut you off, but I am going to for a second. Do you have a question or a
Yeah,
comment specifically
do.
about the inclusionary zoning component?
I do.
right.
One of my questions is this taking into account accessibility for various needs? Physical, mental, visual, hearing?
That's a great question. So accessible units are not the same as affordable units. Typical of like a 40B development or 40R, they can typically be required. A lot of times in new development, they're built to some of that standard regardless. But we don't have a requirement for accessible units. That's typically never been required in the zoning bylaw.
That's
Right.
curious, especially nowadays. And the other question I had is there a concern that there'll be a lot more transients coming and going because of all the building around the train stations?
I do not believe there is that concern, so we don't regulate ownership versus rental, and zoning has not in its past time.
Okay, and this is probably a very naive question, but in the end, the bottom line, who's profiting from this? Will our taxes go down or just continue to go up?
I think that's a loaded question.
That is a loaded question.
Maybe we should ask the finance committee
Yeah, there you
instead. I
go.
don't know.
We got a member here.
Oh, here he is, here he is.
And he took the bait.
Joe Brennan, 30 Avenue, Vice Chair of the Finance Committee. So, in general, in finance institutions, it's possible. Because the cost is 2.5, the
Having trouble hearing you.
Okay, what, is it better? I'm very close to the microphone. So, is this coming through on Zoom? Loud in the room.
Should be, I hope so.
I'm waiting for any confirmation then.
Gail, can you hear him?
Vaguely, but let's try it. I wish it was captioned.
Well, I wonder is this microphone amplified in the room and not being picked up on Zoom?
It should be captured through there. That's where the
You can hear.
Okay, we have someone in the room here who's on Zoom who can confirm how so I think this is good, it's gonna be good. All right, so, Proposition 2.5, towns, taxation of existing property cannot go up more than 2.5% per year. The cost of running a town goes up by more than 2.5% per year. Just because, as we're all uncomfortably aware, inflation is often more than 2.5% per year, especially for things like healthcare, which the towns provide for its employees. So, if you make any changes to zoning, such as the downtown smart growth district or allowing multifamily zoning in an existing single-family district to encourage new construction, the new construction does enlarge the tax base and actually allows the town to raise more than its total tax by more than 2.5% without raising your taxes more than 2.5%. So your taxes will go up by 2.5% a year indefinitely. But we won't need an override that sends them up by more than 2.5%, as long as we have some amount of development going on that provides new growth to the tax base.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Well, unfortunately, I couldn't hear all that. And in the end, who profits out of this?
So that's a loaded question, again, with not a clear answer.
Okay, and are the school systems ready if we start building these and more people come in with kids?
I think we'll save that question towards the latter half of the project if it comes up again, but it's a great question.
I'm not in a position to answer that question in particular, but that it is a good point to note that the law that is requiring this type of zoning does require the zoning to be suitable for families, families with children, in addition to other residents. And so this is something that all communities that are needing to implement an MBTA community zoning will all need to grapple with that together. So I can't answer that particular question, but we're not alone in that.
All right, and then again, I know it has nothing to do with you, but everything to do is the wildlife that's already being encroached upon. And we see coyotes and foxes and all these animals walking around here now. And I'm just concerned that we'll be displacing more of them as we start to build more places, more apartments, more buildings. But all right, I guess I threw out my concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Gail.
you. Thank you.
And Tom Armstrong on the Cpdc had his hand raised. So
Tom?
Yes. I'd like to hear from the public on this aspect. Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, the housing and the affordable criteria of 10% is a floating scale. So if we go up to 10,000 units in Reading, now we're at 1,000 units of affordability. I'm a little bit concerned that over 10 years, we could go up to 1,500 units here, of which 10% would be 150 units of affordability. I'm in favor of an affordability component. If we put in criteria in it, obviously that would allow, this would be a contingent one, that would allow CPDC to determine if the 20% criteria could be used. Would people be more compatible with that? Hypothetically, for example, if a developer came to us and was willing to go to 20% and wanted perhaps 35% of ground space to be used, and CPDC determined that enough playgrounds were in the area, enough vegetation was in the area, and the height restrictions were there. Would the public be generally in favor of that, knowing that CPDC would be seeing that, and it would be a discretionary component?
yeah, so maybe just for clarification's sake, I think what's being asked is if in the language, could it be a bit less prescriptive in what the trade-off is, and right, have an applicant come in with what the by right application would be, and then if they were to increase affordable units or deeper affordable units, what they would be asking of us. And so that language, let me see if I can kind of give a general concept of what that language could look like. Broken keyboard here, which never helps. So in general, that could be phrased as something like, for projects that provide additional affordable units, the applicant may request a waiver from the dimensional controls outlined in section 6 and 9, which I know we haven't gotten to yet. I think many are familiar, but we haven't gone through it just yet. But that would allow, right, an applicant to say, could I do an extra 3 to 5 feet in height instead of lot coverage, or could I do, right, extra height and small increase in lot coverage? And that way it's still a discretionary waiver process, which can be done in site plan review. So that's just in general, right? Instead of being prescriptive, would we allow them to come to us and say, here's what I would need to do for deeper affordable units? Would you consider that? And right, that can be a tough discussion through CPDC at times, but waivers are discretionary.
See, I think you've captured what I'm kind of asking and what's going through my mind, because I don't want this MBTC area to put us further behind the 10% requirements, because then that allows affordable housing to be constructed without the significant input of the town throughout the town. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew.
So would that mean that the staff would do the waiver, or if it was a 1 or 2 family, it would come to CPDC? Because it's, what is it, single family and 2 family are by right, whereas if it's bigger than that, it comes to site plan review at CPDC.
Correct. So single and 2s are exempt from site plan review. Anything 3+ units triggers site plan review.
And the only way that there would be a percentage to increase in affordability is if there was more than
Right. So in general, it likely applies to multi-family developments that trigger site plan review. If someone came in with the proposal for a single unit that is deed restricted affordable, we would work on that on the administration side of staff.
There was a question in the back, yeah.
Hello, Dr. Holt, 46 Daisy Ave. I know this applies, all the zoning bylaws apply to this multi-family housing in K-zone, but I know I would like to kind of, we're not even close to being through with this. I know there's a lot of people that would like to kind of address concerns about the zone, including myself. Is there a way perhaps we could just put an end time on this and pick it up at the next meeting? And
so we didn't talk about this, right? There is a time, right? So right, we did. This is the meat of a town meeting warrant article. So we do, right? It's boring. It is. I admit it. Zoning language is boring. We do need to go through this. I do, right? Thank you.
We were also told that this new zone would be proposed at this meeting, and I think
yeah.
Just raise your hands, who's here to discuss the new zone?
So this material is what we were not able to get to at the last hearing, and I would concur. There's not much more to get through, but we do have to get through this in order to have the broader discussion about the where.
Okay, I think part of the other problem too is that I feel a little bit like we go cart before the horse, because I don't know that any of us are really satisfied with the most of it.
Understood, right. But we want to frame out this proposal, right? So we can get the details, and then we'll understand whether that's viable or not, and then we can go move on to other proposals.
Okay, so these
right.
bylaws will apply to no matter where this zone ends up, and regardless of how big it is, they apply.
If right now, right, if it's big or it's small, right, yeah. I'll put it this way, if it's a conversion of an existing single family zone here or there, this is what I think that would be proposed. Now, if we move on to something that's a conversion of the industrial district or the downtown, right, it would be something different than this, right? But we only, Andrew showed the zoning district, we only have so many acreages of non-single family home in Reading to begin with. So it is likely that there is some component of a proposal that will come to town meeting that will have this some area that that matches what we're talking about here.
Okay, thank you. I'll wait.
All right, but I understand, you know, this is dry and we want to sort of move through it. Yeah. And I guess with that, right, like, I think the inclusionary zoning piece is important, and I thank you, right? It's always an education. If you, right, I saw a number of other hands jet up. If you want to continue that conversation, we can, but knowing that, you know, it is 8 o'clock and we have other stuff to move on to. With that, I still see some hands there. In front, yeah, and then Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Cpdc, I live at 172 High Street. I do think this is a little bit of putting the cart before the horse, only because if you're talking about this inclusionary zone being applied to the MR district, I find it hard to believe that you're ever going to have the opportunity for the 10% in the MR district, since a high percentage of those properties wouldn't support more than a few units, rather than, it won't get to the 10 unit. And I think it's a terrible trade-off to provide for affordable housing at the cost of things like dimensional controls, right? And I think the dimensional controls and the lot coverage, those are aspects of the zoning that preserve the neighborhood feel, right? If you allow people to build right up to 10 feet from the property lines and 10 feet from the street, and they cover more of the property with their footprint, then you lose trees, you lose open space, and the quality of the character of the neighborhood gets destroyed. And I'm all in favor of affordable housing. I want to see a lot more affordable housing. I don't want to see it at the cost of the things that radically change the neighborhoods. So again, I'm proposing that we go over the MR district, because I mean, the inclusionary language might not be necessary at all if we end up with an MR zone that doesn't have any potential for more than 10 units, right? We wouldn't need to have that in there. Am I wrong in that?
So there are lots, right? There are lots, half acre or bigger, that allow 10 units or more within the proposed district, and likely any proposed aspect of a district similar to the mixed residential. And so this is not an affordability 40B law. This is just a general housing and zoning law. So it's why there's tight limitations on the affordability, because at times they can be used to, I guess, prohibit developments due to the financial considerations. So the state has put these, right, more stringent requirements and having to prove additional affordability through an economic analysis because of the costs associated with affordable units. So this is not an affordable housing law. It's really not derived to like increase SHI for many communities, not just Reading alone. The limitations are tough. 10% can put you behind, especially when you're talking 10 units or more. But there are lots in this area that could allow for 10 units or more. And if so, if those projects are developed right, we would like to get the affordable components out of them. And the incentives, right, I don't just fully disagree on, I think, what we've talked about for incentives. It's just if we want more to stay above 10% in this specific zone, more than 10%, how do we get there? It's always.
But we did hear you, right? You said that, right? What I heard you say is you're not in favor of the trade-off for inclusionary yeah, housing to the dimensional.
So a couple of things, I do
I'm
agree
up
with
this
you, if
same.
there is the potential for 10 units or more to be developed in the MR zone, then you really do need the language in there to do that. I agree with that. But the other thing that the other comment I wanted to make is about the incentive. I'm an architect, I've been working for developers for a long time, and I can tell you, the only real, honest, true incentive to a developer is increased profits. And that's only gonna come from adding units, okay? So you can talk about, you know, giving them more ground coverage, lot coverage, or whatever. None of that really is gonna ultimately translate into a legitimate incentive unless you allow them to make more money at what they want to do. So I think you have to really have to gauge the incentive program, because a lot of that is gonna fall on deaf ears, and they're just not gonna do it unless they can make more money.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And then Chris, the other Chris behind you. Yeah.
Chris Haley, 71 Chris Road, agree with the other Chris, as well as the beginning of what Tom had started off by saying. Every decision I make, it's the same thing. I scale it up. Tom just scaled it up. We are going to fall behind in 40B. There's no, you cannot guarantee that we are going to go ahead and take single family lots, put up 3, and then be able to overcome the deficit that's in there. All it takes is 25 single family lots to erode Eaton Lakeview that's up there. That's it. So how are we going to overcome the deficit when we scale this up?
So with the Eden Lakeview, So with the Eden Lakeview, right, we'd be at 50 units above 10% based on the current denominator. Again, it's not an affordable housing lot. There are multiple ways that the community can address affordable housing, and whether that's through other developmental areas, partnership with your Reading Housing Authority, things like CPA. There's a lot of avenues for affordable housing. This law just has its limitations on affordable housing.
I do think, right, any proposal that gets put forward, the way that they crafted the MBTA communities law, we are going to be challenged because you're going to generate the denominator without being able to generate the numerator, whether it's here, whether it's anywhere in town, right? Actually, any community that's doing this, that everyone's going to have that same challenge. So I don't want to I don't want to dive into that discussion right now, because I think that's something that isn't solvable necessarily. I mean, we nibble around the edges here. Maybe we can get a few additional so we don't fall behind. But I think inherent to the way that they set up the law, they sort of tied all the community's hands. It is going to make it more difficult.
And you're asking the right question. I guess I would support what you were saying, where the answer to that question, I don't think lies within what we need to do with MBTA communities. I think the answer lies within what the town of Reading does with the multiple tools that we have everywhere across town to stay above that 10%.
No, I agree with that. I just think if it becomes incentivized to knock down a 1 and put up a 3 all over MBTA communities, then there's no point in doing anything else. You've already lost the 40B aspect. You're going to go way under right at the beginning. So I understand.
Again, the denominator.
A balancing it.
So again, the denominator changes doesn't change until the 2030 census, and so we have time to track and determine if we're falling behind and where, right, the additional affordable unit developments are coming from.
I think Tom saw the denominator.
I just see one hand raised on Zoom, if we can grab this one real quick. All right, I had asked you to unmute. I don't know if you can. toggling on and off for you. One second. Can you try unmuting now, Jared?
All right, let's come back.
Yeah, Jared, keep trying. I just allowed you to be able to unmute at any time, so please speak up if you can. But so I think what we're hearing is we don't really prefer an incentive-laden approach, whether that's through just general waivers with the applicant coming to us or prescriptive in certain allowances. So we as staff can take that and either propose to remove this or see if we can come up with better language that maybe addresses a lot of what we've heard tonight, but we'll work through that. So moving forward down the bylaw, section 6.0 is what's called the intensity regulations. And this is where, right, your setbacks and your heights and all of your prescriptive requirements of a zoning district are outlined. So as we scroll down this, we'll see some of the amendments here. So here in section 624, we're simply removing apartment 40 because it's not proposed to exist anymore under the current concept proposal, because it would be converted to the mixed residential. And this clause was really directed at large-scale multi-family development with like minimum 40,000 square foot lot sizes at the time. So we had proposed to remove the A40 but keep the protection for the business A district. We had gotten into landscaped area a bit, and there's more below, but we would like all projects within the zone development in the mixed residential zone to include 25% of the lot area as landscaped area. So that's new, typical to the smaller scale residential. It's typically a requirement on larger development, but I think we've heard not just throughout this process, but many other housing regulations that open space and landscape is important. So we wanted to say 25% of the lot area is to be landscaped area.
I have a comment on that. It's a comment and kind of a question. I guess my suggestion is that we increase that to 35%. And the question is, what's the impact of that on the numbers that we can yield? My reason is that I don't think the mixed residential area should have less required landscape area than the apartment 80 district, which is 35%. And my additional comment is it's not been my intention to take the mixed residential area and turn it into just like an expanded A40. Like if the A40 only requires 25%, I don't want that just to apply to the neighborhoods that are currently under consideration for the mixed residential.
I think we're open to modeling 35% to make sure it works. Again, it comes down to everything on the lot, right? The parking and the landscape and the structure itself, and making sure it can all be done on a lot and promotes viable, attractive builds. So we can model 35% and get back to you. The reason that's probably in the A80, right, as a requirement is because you're talking an 80,000 square foot minimum lot size, much larger space, and the lot coverage, right, then just allows more room. So we had felt 25% is new to single family, two family, and really in general, this small scale multifamily, but yes, we'll model that to see if we can get that to work.
So, it's sort of hard to talk about this and the percentages without talking about the other components. I guess I would not to be too prescriptive and HOA like, but I do think we probably would need to tighten up that definition of what a landscaped area is, because that could be like, I don't know, I could see someone trying to get away with like I don't know. Anyways, we need to think about what that really means. not that I didn't, that came out so wrong. I love mulch. I just meant like some place that was like not really landscape, just like like something that wasn't really part of what we probably all think of as landscape, whether it's, does lawn count as landscaped area? Does, you know, what counts as landscaped area?
Right.
I think is really what we need
Right,
to.
if it's a series of shrubs in the front,
Yeah,
front or
yeah.
something.
But I guess what I was thinking, and we're gonna get into this, but I'll just write in the next couple of sections here. What I sort of generally understand is right now, I know this is a gross generalization, but homes, single-family homes, or even the two-family homes occupy pretty much no more than 25%. So they're occupying somewhere in that 20 to 25%. And then, right, we have parking, right? And then we have landscape area that we're talking about. And then there's a delta there that would be sort of what, you know, whatever. And I guess when I look at the size of, right, the sort of in this whole district, the parcels are somewhere generally are within that like quarter to a half acre size. So when I start to look at, okay, what does 30% mean and what does 25% mean for lot coverage or for landscaping, it generally, I think this is a gross generalization, but it means that pretty much, except the ones that are on the really small lots, every building could about double in size from what it is right now. I sort of like took some like, oh, what could you do on that lot? What could you do on that lot? Sort of like did around. I'm guessing some others, maybe Dave Talbot, I think did the same thing of what you had mentioned something to me about your neighbors. So like, you know, what could you actually do on some of these lots? So generally it's about a doubling in size of the structure itself. And then the question is, where does that fit on, where does that go on the lot, and can you fit parking? And is there enough green space there that it doesn't really sort of like detract from the neighborhood? Sorry. And I guess that's, to me, that's the question is, you know, is doubling the size of the structure on everyone's lot, right? Like it wouldn't happen to everyone's lot, but is that a dramatic change to the character? I guess you say obviously, but I don't really think, I don't know. I'm not so sure that is, right? Because when I look at someone's property in this district, a lot of them have, you know, it's 60, maybe 100 feet of frontage, right? And you have the way that you would be able to build is back. It's not going to be, you're really not going to be able to build like up to the street and create a new street front. It's going to be another unit back behind.
10 feet.
That is, yeah.
Right.
So I'm just trying to like figure how you know, given the parcels, right? How does that increase? Because right now, I guess the other bit of information here, right, is right now, and any property owner can build up to 25% of their property. And we don't, right? We generally don't. And so does the incentive to have a two-family on there mean that everyone would, and anyone would? Right, they're all questions. Right.
It's an interesting question. You've got me thinking about, myself included, that when you think about homes in all neighborhoods, not just the neighborhood that is on the proposed series of maps or throughout S15 or in S20, when somebody puts an addition on their house, it's still a single family house. I think I doubled the size of my own house, so we didn't put up a second one. I mean, so that happens, and is that an interesting question? Do people perceive that as a change of character when it happens incrementally in neighborhoods all the time? I think it's an interesting question.
Yeah,
I'm not answering it.
Yeah,
It's like,
no,
oh, that has me thinking.
Right, I guess to me, that's the question, that is the question. That, because I will get through, I'm sorry, I sort of jumped around because we really want to get through here, but to me, as we talk about these next things, the next pieces of it is, you know, do these really change how the buildings would sit on the parcel, and when someone, like you said, Heather, someone builds an addition and doubles the size of their building back, does that change the neighborhood? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. I guess that's what we need to sort of think.
And for the landscape areas, you said it would include parking, but when you think about a landscape area, usually it's something green. Is that pervious? How does that all work together?
Sorry, landscaped area would not include impervious area. So impervious area is not in the lot coverage. There's actually, you pave your whole lot today if you really wanted to. But we would consider landscaped area pervious area. And we can look back at that definition and tighten that up a bit. But
I just to spin off of what you just discussed as far as like an addition. That's an addition on a single family, and I'm not close back. I live in a multi-family street, because we have single, two, and we have some fortunately on the street area. That being said, when you take up that amount of lot, the difference between a single family and what we're talking about is you still have the same amount of cars because you're a single family. We now have to think about the multifamily units with parking. So it does change the character, because not only are we adding the building 2 times the size, we now have to figure in the parking and the landscaping, and then you want it to be family friendly. So we also have to think about the sidewalks in the streets. Are they wide enough to accommodate if we don't have enough parking in a driveway? Is there enough room on the streets? Some streets in the areas that you're proposing only have parking on one side, and that is how it is on some of those streets by the town decided to do that. There's also not sidewalks on both sides of the street. So I don't know, I might be going off topic a little bit, but my vision is that going to be put into some of these building provisions? Are they going to fix the sidewalks so that they're at, I don't know what you call it, I'm not a city developer, code. And also we're going to start looking at the streets, because I really think, unfortunately, we're going to have to think about turning some of these streets into one-ways, especially in the section of the area that I live in, because we can't get 2 cars down the street if we have 1 car parked. On some of the streets, if you have cars on 2 sides, which it doesn't label, it doesn't say you can't park on this side. A car, small, can get through, but you can't get a bigger vehicle through, like an ambulance or a fire truck. So now you're problems, and those streets don't have sidewalks, so now we're adding sidewalks. So I think that your town developer, needs to really look at some of these areas with the streets, the double-sized buildings, the parking lot that's going to be put into this. Because I know that we've talked about this before, the 1.25 I feel is not going to work, and it also doesn't follow what we have set up in the smart development area. But we also have to look at the streets with regards to putting sidewalks so that it now becomes accessible, and how wide our streets are in some of these areas, and we're gonna have to think about changing the flow of traffic with one-ways. That's just the bigger picture, and I think we really need to think about those things when you're thinking about all this, because that is gonna be a problem, because it is a problem in some streets already. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. For us, long-term wise, whatever concept and district comes out of this, we certainly wish to revisit the complete streets priority plan, the sidewalk plans, all of these existing plans and infrastructure, and see if it's worth refreshing those or establishing new priorities for them, right? Whether it's this zone, school districts and areas or other, and see if we can, refresh that and reprioritize some areas, because we've just gone through the Complete Streets grants, so we're ineligible for a few years. So now it's a good time to refresh and say where could be next, both locally funded and through the grant program.
Right, it's 8:35 right now. You know, I'd really like to sort of move on to the, both the map and sort of the discussion of other proposals and other public comment that we've got by 9 o'clock. How do you think? 25 minutes for
I think we can,
the bulk of the dimensional controls?
I think we could get through that,
All
right? Yeah. So I think a lot of the discussion will come back to setbacks and landscape.
Yeah.
So we are proposing a slight language here for a mixed residential district to allow more than one principal building only when the development meets the definition of a courtyard. I think through some of the other hearings, we had shown conceptual concepts of what that could look like. What we don't want is back-to-back principal structures that are 35 feet in height and kind of detract from the neighborhood feel. Accessory apartments, detached, accessory use could still be done, but principal dwellings either have to remain as the structure or unless it's a courtyard development, which is defined in section 2. We had added some language for clarity for applicants to make sure we get the proper materials to review that if one would ever be proposed.
Andrew, so on this one, you would be looking at only a courtyard. You would not be looking at a unit in the front, unit in the back with an access road, access driveway.
Correct. Again, an detached accessory apartment can still be allowed, but separate regulations and driveway review for that that we've worked through with the fire department. Principal structure, no. Shared driveway. Question. So here's where table 6.3 is the table of dimensional controls. This is where all your setbacks, your frontage, your minimum lot sizes are proposed or prescribed in the zoning bylaw. So as we scroll down, this is the controls for multifamily dwellings here in this subheading. Again, proposing to retitle A40 to the MR district. We're looking at a 60 feet minimum lot width and frontage to make sure, the width is there. We're looking at that 5,000 minimum square foot lot size because that gets, the by right lots into compliance, a vast majority of by right lots into compliance with these two controls here. And then, what we had done, it's a little hard because they're separated by pages. They look like bigger changes here, but we're proposing to try to mimic single family as close as possible, as well as existing forms as close as possible, There's a lot of structures in the proposed district that have non-conforming setbacks. Currently for single family, this is why you're looking at 20 feet in the front, 15 feet in the side, and 20 feet in the rear. And that might make sense, for what is a 15,000 square foot minimum on your typical subdivision or single family development today. Again, when we looked at the zoning district here, this proposed area, a number of structures didn't meet these requirements. And so, these aren't the only way to do housing or characteristic housing. So we wanted to propose slight reductions given the smaller lot sizes here from 20 down to 10, side yard from 15 down to 10, right? We have a lot of narrow lots in the area, and 15 feet in the rear as well. And I just want to remind everybody, this is from your property line, and all new developments would be subject to this. So consider 2 lots next to each other. You'd have 10 feet on the side here and 10 feet on the side for the other development if something were to happen akin to that. Again, as we talked through lot coverage, we're proposing a slight increase from 25% to 30%, and we're proposing to keep height at 35 feet, similar as exists, the same as exists for single family development. So we have proposed these controls really in relation to existing structures to date that don't meet the current stronger requirements and the ability for potential development. When you talk into driveways and things, right, these are minimums, so they could be shifted. You could do a deeper front yard, you could do a deeper side yard, you could play with that a little bit. But in general, the lot coverage is the most prescriptive and stringent requirement, because in many cases, even at the minimum sized lot, you can't build out to the full setback requirements due to the lot coverage. So I know we get a lot of qualitative feedback, right? We're trying to make this zone could be more urban centers, Somerville-like. Those areas, right, are 60+% lot coverage and less parking for similar development styles. We're really trying to keep the forms mimicking out there single-family development patterns that we've seen in recent history. So we thought they were viable, but we're happy to take feedback on those.
Chris, Dean Teddy, 172 High Street, Precinct 7. So again, I think this is the single most destructive part of the whole MR zone. These setbacks, reducing them 10 feet is just absolutely too small. And it's too small for S15, S20, and S40, but it's not that much of an issue because people are only building 1 and 2 family houses, and they need the yard for play, open space. As soon as you take those single family and 2 family houses and turn that into multifamily, now they don't need that because they're packing in more people, and they're going to build up to those limits, and it's going to look terrible. That's the single biggest destructive part of the changing the neighborhood character, is building up to these setback limits. So I would like to see those absolutely have to change. 10 feet is just far too short. In particular, the front yard setback. My reading of the law says that the front yard setback goes from the street right away, not from the property line, not from the sidewalk, but from the street right away. 10 feet from the street right away, if it's the curb or the edge of the pavement, is just, it's from you to me. To have a 3-story building that close to the street is just terrible for the character and quality of the neighborhood.
Yeah, I do want it right. It is not the street. It's not the curb. It's from the property line, right? So there's almost everywhere.
So
there's.
Where is the property line in reference to a street that has a little bit of green space, then the sidewalk, and then the front yard? How do we
Usually, right, I'll say in a lot of neighborhoods, you can tell where that property line is, right? Because you've got the street, the curb, the tree lawn, the sidewalk, and then another space, and then everyone built, right? Everyone built little retaining walls, or sort of right along the property line, right? A lot of streets, right? You see where that line of little retaining walls are, usually a foot or 2. That's typically where the property line is.
Can we find that information at in engineering or?
Yeah.
So you can see where the line would be drawn, because everybody's going to be different.
Absolutely, everybody's
different.
different.
Everybody should have the ability to go somewhere and see, where is my front line? How do I determine where my side property lines are? And then just pace it off you know, hang a curtain just to see how short those distances really are.
So, nope, yes, you can go to the engineering department for plot plans or any records that may be there.
I will say the GIS, right, you can go online and look on the GIS. It's not perfect. It's right, because it's all different projections, but it's pretty good. It gives you a pretty good perspective of where that line is when you layer in the aerial. Yeah, so the GIS isn't perfect, but under the GIS, right, you can zoom into a property or a neighborhood, and under markup, you can measure a line from the assumed property line. Again, it's not perfect, but you can see here on the corner of Temple Street, this is around a 10-foot setback. And so this, right, we felt was somewhat characteristic to a number of neighborhoods within the zone. Every neighborhood is different. There are a few, right, here and there, but and again, because you could go beyond the minimum, right, we want to try to promote variety in the streetscape, which Temple Street is a good example of. There's 20 feet, there's 5 feet, there's 2 feet up and down Temple Street. And so, right, when we get a little bit too prescriptive, it produces, similar house after similar. We want to try to be flexible and creative in approaches. So we thought a lesser front to activate some lots more than others, right? We thought rear yard, we could try to say that's where we want to try to focus more yard space and usable space for residents. We're happy to flip-flop those, but 10 feet, I think on paper, it always, right, when you're walking a neighborhood, you don't always realize 10 feet from 15 to 12 to 8. And so we thought it kept somewhat in character with what exists today.
What happens though when there's no sidewalk or tree line?
So it still
runs right down to the street.
It would still be 10 feet from that property line. There are neighborhoods without sidewalks, but it's where the right of way, right? So yes, those are typical of your smaller residential neighborhoods. I think down by Washington Park and a few others. High Street, yep.
Yeah, but please don't confuse your property line with the town's property line. Just because somebody has put out grass, I know I had an uncle who took over an entire street. He just one day went out back, put down dirt, put out grass, waited a year, and that was became his yard. Just because you've got grass that goes to the pavement doesn't mean that's where your street, where your property line is. Andrew, if you can bring that slide back up for a second.
So I just make one additional comment, just really quickly. With respect to the zoning setbacks, if you zone it, they will build it, okay? So just understand that what you just showed were two-story single-family residences or two-family residences. Those are not three-story brick box, apartment or condo complexes that are that close to the street. The perception of that would be vastly different, and any builder who has the opportunity to build up to 10 feet from the property line will do so.
Yeah, and I think that's where the lot coverage comes back into play. You can't build out to every setback, so do you choose to push it towards the front or towards the rear? And those are your two choices. And it's hard to say everyone's going to build to the front or everybody's going to build to the rear, or if everybody is centered, but that's right. That's what we're trying to focus on. The lot coverage and the setbacks all come together to say, here's your kind of options on a design palette and footprint area. Where does it best fit with the driveways, the landscape, the yard space, the porches, the decks, everything. So it all comes into play together. Just keep that in mind. So that's like the bulk of the dimensional controls, right? There is some additional language as we scroll through section 6. Actually, kind of importantly here, maybe if people don't realize it, this footnote 1 in the table basically says that every property can build to a 10-foot front setback today. So we're proposing to potentially remove that clause, right? I don't know if it's needed or desired, right? If every zone has these requirements above, why does the footnote say that the required front yard for any building may be 10 feet? I don't really know where this one derived from or came from, so we were trying to clarify that because the rest of the language says your front setback could be the average of your 2 abutting properties. And so we took out the 10 feet language and said the average could remain, right? Because again, that could promote variety in the streetscape and forms of a neighborhood.
So, yeah, so, right, I think that going back to that table and as Chris mentioned, right, that's the I'm going to say the bulk of the question, right, of the 30% lot coverage in the 10-foot setbacks. There's really not a lot of change being proposed. I mean, if you take out the discussion about inclusionary zoning, which agreed, right, won't come into play all that often in here because it's only for those bigger parcels. This is the bulk of the proposal, and I guess right, to fit within MBTA communities, right, there's this play on which if you increase the 10-foot side yard setback, does that mean you need to do something different in order to stay, and this is important, right, in order to stay at 15 units per acre over the whole district? And so I know I was talking to a couple of people, right, that, right, it's if you no matter what we do and where we're at, we have to come in with the zone at 15 units per acre over the whole area. When you add in streets and all that stuff, it's likely and the parcel level going to be more. It actually has to be more than 15 units per acre to come in with compliance. And so I guess my question to you, because it's hard to do this, without the tools that they put together, is how much wiggle room is there in this, or is there any wiggle room? And I guess before you answer that, I think the other thing, and we skipped right over it and it wasn't intentional, is parking, right?
That's section 9.
Yeah, section 9, right? And I think that, right, we had talked before about 1.25. I think that the discussion, right, is keeping it at 1.5, which is what it is today. So even more like not changing anything, but right, sort of this table.
Yeah, so there is flexibility, I think, in the compliance model, right, to either increase these slightly or flip-flop them, and same with maybe, again, we modeled the 1.5 parking under these controls and we're able to make it work. It's just, as you start to increase it all, right, 35% open space, more parking, more stringent setbacks, how many lots are we knocking out of, right, the minimum build area that the state's looking to calculate. So, right, we try to take that all into consideration. And then also, right, not just compliance, but built environment too. What does that mean? What's developable, what's applicable, what's appropriate? And so that's the balance we're trying to reach here with this, but I think there is wiggle room in the compliance sake for it. For us, we looked at the narrow lots and felt like 10 feet might be it, right? To go more than that, you're probably restricting on side setbacks to get any builds, but front and rear, I think, can have some wiggle room.
As you said, as you change this different components, you quote knock parcels out, right? And that means that they wouldn't count as part of the density calculation. So my question is, as you, right, we would do things to quote, knock them out. Does that mean that the zone needs to grow bigger in order to get the count? Or does that mean that we, at some point, if you knock enough parcels out, then you just never get to that zone-wide density?
I think it's closer to the latter, but right, as if we were to expand further outwards in Reading, right, you kind of see the natural shift of smaller lots into larger lots, which the density controls would remain the same for the density metrics, right? The 22 units per acre wouldn't change, but I think the setbacks on larger lots then become more at play into what could be, right, keeping 15 or 20 feet, because larger lots just have the buildable area to do that. And I just want to know, right, there's co-benefits to this too. I know we talked a lot about the multifamily potential. Doing this brings a lot of the lots in the area from non-conforming status, and the structures in them from non-conforming status into conforming. So for every single family property owner who's proposed a small addition along their non-conforming setback and had to go through the lengthy process of ZBA review, engineered plot plans, architectural plan, the whole shebang, for months of hearing, that might be alleviated now as we look to bring those lots and structures into conformance.
The woman in the back there.
But yes, also quickly to confirm, we are proposing 1.5 parking spaces.
Thank you, Jennifer Hillary, Hillcrest Road. I'm glad you have the 22 units per acre figure. So we're at this point with the proposal setbacks that we see tonight, we're actually 7 units per acre above what is required by the MBTA law.
So it gets back to John's point, right? In the district and in the modeling, we have a total district with X amount of acres, and right, that total district density has to be 15. But then when the state says, okay, your developable areas, you have to subtract your right-of-ways, wetland and protected areas, municipal land, if there's any in the proposed boundary, it starts to shrink that total acreage, right, of developable land versus total acreage. And so when we do that, we have to, right, consider the density of the individual parcels to achieve the district-wide density. It's really just kind of pushing a slight bit more of that density onto the parcels, because you can't build on right-of-ways or municipal land or wetlands. So they say, we're going to take that out for you. This is your developable land. Try to find the path to 15 units per acre, and 22 units per acre on any individual lot is the lowest we've been able to test to stay at 15. I think it's between 15 and 16 across the district currently.
Which is 15 units per acre across that entire area, including streets, which have to be removed, which is how the density gets higher on the parcels.
Right.
How's that for math class?
I'm going to need to sit with that. Thank you. And I just want to reiterate that I agree that the setbacks as proposed in the new district seem too small in comparison to what I heard to be your ideal, to mimic as much as possible the single-family homes as they exist. I would support this project.
Thank you.
Can I make one other quick note? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Andrew, on your point about that, the footnote number 1, I don't think yet we should be so quick to remove that. As I read that, and I just looked at the GIS, there are some properties in the proposed area where the property is right up against the front line. As I read this, this seems to be an attempt once upon a time to ensure that there was at least a 10 10-foot setback, but then also to ensure that there was, that buildings weren't being built up to 10 feet while next to buildings that were at a 20-foot setback. I just think we should consider that carefully before we remove it entirely.
Sorry, trying to find
That's
the
okay.
original language here.
It seemed to be an attempt to kind of not have the average be buildings up against the lot line.
Right, less than, yep.
So it's 8:59.
Yep.
And I think we're at a good place to sort of move on from the thrilling words of zoning, zoning to move on to some of the other comments that I know people want to make. So I guess I'll start off by saying, you know, we got a number of letters and a number of you know, community feedback, which I'm glad to get that. One thing that we just received that jumped out to me is a letter that sort of helped to sort of summarize some of the feedback that we got, and also some of the proposals, sort of the thinking behind some of the proposals that were already out there. And I guess I just want to, right, we as a community, we have a question in front of us, and this person said, you know, that part of the criteria that they were thinking about is, you know, they listed 3 things: encouraging additional development in underperforming, underutilized zones. And this is the one that struck me: enhancing existing zoning to minimize or avoid impact on existing single-family zones, and ensure maintenance of adequate, affordable housing inventory. We sort of, on the last one, we sort of already talked, right, about we're not sure that with this law, that we can necessarily ensure maintenance of adequate, affordable housing inventory. We can try to incorporate, but I wouldn't want to put that out as the premise of what we're trying to do, right? I just want to be upfront. Like, I don't think in any proposal that we come up with that we're gonna solve that issue. Any of this additional housing, we're still gonna have to grapple with that issue. But I think, right, in the crux of the issue, right, is the second point that was made was, you know, minimizing existing single-family zones. And I'm pretty sure that that's the goal of everyone in this room, and that's our goal, right? We don't want to, or I shouldn't speak for all of us, right? That's my goal. I don't want it to create significant impacts on existing single-family zones. I think the question is, you know, what is the other alternative? You know, are there other alternatives that can meet the requirement of MBTA communities and not have other significant impacts to the town as a whole, right? And so that's really I think the issue at hand. And I just want to sort of, this is a great letter, and sort of clearly articulated that there's this question that we have, right? Obvious is whether do we focus this on keeping residential zones residential, or do we focus on turning commercial zones into residential zones, right? I mean, that's the crux of the issue. The proposal here is, I think, the sort of the best one of keeping residential zone residential, but I know that there's a lot of folks that would rather turn the commercial zones into residential. So that's where we're at. Yep. And with that, I think that Andrew has, right, there's a couple of different ways where we can turn some of the commercial property into commercial zones into residential zone. and some that have bigger impacts than others. And I think that's where Andrew.
Yeah, so I can jump in, and I want to thank Borean in the front who kind of helped, and Brad who helped give us some data and other context to this. Actually, some of your proposal is actually pretty close to the modeling. Great job. But right, when we talk commercial districts and MBTA communities and their relation or even limitations, right? Because when we think of commercial zones, we want to consider some elements of commercial, typically mixed use, right? Development style, like commercial first floor and residential above sometimes, right? Maybe that's the goal for the commercial corridors or commercial districts, or maybe it's housing in general. Again, the MBTA communities law is a housing law, not a development law. So it's quite restrictive in terms of its ability to require mixed use. So if you want to require mixed use, you can only do it in what they call an eligible location where existing village style or downtown development is essential to preserve pedestrian access to amenities. We would consider that, right? Our downtown district is likely the one that would conform to that language. The other commercial corridors would be a bit tougher, I think, to make that case, but we could try. If you do require a mixed use, it has to be as of right, of course, does not preclude the multifamily only allowances that the law requires. You can't do parking for commercial uses if mixed use is required. And you can have a ground floor maximum for commercial space of 30% of the building's total floor area, which actually isn't a bad number. Actually pretty high up there. So, but again, the stringent requirements, right? The other one is, and I don't know why I didn't put it here, is that mixed use requirements can only account for up to, I believe, 25% of your unit capacity in the zoning district, I believe. So we would recommend, right, if we were seeking commercial areas for multifamily housing, that we would try to incentivize the commercial by saying, right, whatever the floor is for multifamily housing, you could do a bit more for mixed use or commercial, because it's important to us in the commercial areas, right? 5% less of total land in Reading has some element of commercial tax base to it. Otherwise, you face very long-term implications on the residential base versus commercial base. And then also the, right, I guess we question, right, what is the vision for some of these zones? But when we looked at the model and ran the model, almost the two other commercial districts in town, which is the Business A and a small portion we had called it of the industrial zone. We had looked specifically at what we call the Eastern Gateway, which is around the RMLD area along Ash Street. Both of those, for compliance sake, look at a floor of an allowed 35 units per acre by right. In the two Business A zones, that would combine to about 1,000 units in unit capacity. So that's not enough for the unit capacity alone, right, at 35 DUA, just to kind of let that be known. But we had modeled at a no minimum lot size and a floor area ratio, which is building size to lot size of 2.4, which was typical of downtown-esque development. 4 stories, 60% lot coverage, 25% open space, 1.5 parking spaces, and setbacks that mimicked Business A allowances today for mixed use, which is 5-foot front, 10-foot side, 20-foot rear. Right, that's a very high level of concept in general to model, but at the end, it wasn't enough unit capacity at 35 units per acre. So then we looked at that portion called the Eastern Gateway. We also, and I can show that on a map in just a second, but that also started at the floor of 35 units per acre, which was about 400 units of unit capacity. Again, we were looking at similar controls, right? For this type of development, you would expect around there 15,000 square foot minimum lot size, another 2.4 floor area ratio, 4 stories, 60% lot coverage, 25% open space, 1.5 parking, and 10-foot setbacks all around. Again, that small portion wasn't enough for unit capacity. So when, again, we did some high level concepts of modeling, right? It takes a bit more of an approach in the zoning and also trying to think of what would allow for development. In these areas, you'd likely not to get more than 15% of the inclusionary, where more could potentially be feasible. And for us, that's an important element because if you can get higher affordability requirements to 20 to 25%, that 25% is that's the number you want to try to strive for in dense development, because if it's a rental property, not just do only the percent of affordable units count towards the stock, but all of the units on the development count towards the stock, right? In example, again, in Lakeview, 74 units, rental units, 25% of those are affordable, but all 74 units get to be accounted on the SHI, which helps us get to that 10% even faster. So what we've seen through other communities is that they've had a tough time modeling over 15%, and they allow 5 to 6 stories in Lexington, no density maximums, and even looser controls than what we have proposed here. So, right, we tried to take that into consideration, that maybe we could get 20 to 25%, especially in the industrial zone where it's very large, that we don't know if it's worth, right, trying for compliance sake for the long-term aspects, not just of that zone, but of housing in town to try to promote there. We also, right, again, high-level concept models, we'd have to take out protected and excluded land would need to be factored in. There's wellhead protection areas down South Main Street, there's wetlands in the industrial district, there's certain other areas too that we would have to factor those in, and those could raise or even lessen some of those controls above, especially the density. The incentives for mixed use or other uses would need to exceed these allowances to garner the commercial development, right? That's what we mean by trying to incentivize mixed use. So if you're looking at a floor of 35 units per acre for multifamily, you might consider more for commercial allowances. These areas do, as of note, to remind all, directly abut residential uses. There are neighborhoods directly behind Main Street and directly adjacent on Ash Street. So I just want to keep that in mind because all of these developments are in somebody's neighborhoods, all of these areas. And then when we also look at, right, if this is the floor, we would have to combine these commercial districts for the housing only allowances. And now you're looking at almost all of your commercial zones to say we'd rather promote housing there, both business A and industrial. And that can have the long-term impacts that I was kind of mentioning, right? Not just your tax base, but do you want to bring jobs into the community instead of housing? Do you want to drive people into downtown or industrial in like a Linfield marketplace type? Could we, outside of MBTA communities, say we'd rather incentivize 55 plus age restricted housing because we know that's going to be a need? All of these, right, elements of town needs start to come into play, especially in these zones. And so for us, it's been hard to strongly recommend using them for MBTA communities compliance because you're starting at a higher floor of multifamily. And then if you truly want these other uses, you're kind of even going above and beyond for them. But happy to, yeah. Sorry, I should pull up the map.
So, I just want to say, like, we participated in the workshop, we learned a lot, we drew maps around downtown and so on. So we were kind of learning with Andrew, we saw the map, we heard everybody, like, people were concerned about changing the character. And then, you know, I kind of got interested in town planning because even Lakeview is on my street. So I read the housing development plan 5 or 6 years ago. And then I had the break, like, since I didn't read those documents, now we have MBTA communities there at the new version. And those priority development areas have not changed. The map is exactly the same from 6 years ago. That I'm looking at this industrial zone that was established 20 years ago. So this is not under season opportunity, commercial development. This is the promise that is not realized, has not been realized for many years, has been around. It's really depressing to look at. It's like you drive to Market Basket, you look at those warehouses, and everybody wants to see something different. I talked to the whole neighborhood of others. I live close to it. I don't like what I'm seeing. And there's already so much traffic in Market Basket, so I don't think it's really concerning if you put a residential building there. The traffic is already as big as you can imagine. So, you have those new crossing roads, general way parcels. You have identified them for affordable housing in the housing production plan 2023. Why not use them here? Yes, you want something more. That's not happening, hasn't happened, you had the chance. You had a very long period for something to come out of it, but it's underutilized, underdeveloped. Something needs to happen. We're proposing, create an overlay, give a chance for something to emerge, something better. And I think the community will welcome, unlike what you're proposing about that.
Thank you. I mean, I
I
think,
have a comment on this minimum amount. Is it okay to talk?
yeah,
about it?
please,
Because
yeah.
It's related to what we propose,
Yes.
because we look at this map and I want to say something.
Right, and I guess, right, we sort of did this out a little bit, right?
Right.
Because you didn't yet show those maps, but,
Right.
I'm
So
guessing
I
a lot of people saw them.
Couple of observations, which I don't want to go very deep, it's just I'm looking at it and I want to say something. So first of all, this blue area is not really around the depot. It's heavily weighted to the east, to the north. This is just like an observation. It's not around the depot, and this was my expectation that we're focusing, but it seems we're doing something else. That's the first observation. Second observation, you have those 840 areas, to the south to the west, that disconnected. They're less than 5 acres, they won't count. So I don't think it's worthwhile really. Okay, so these are the two observations. Then I have, so my husband and I spend our time looking at the GIS, kind of looking at the parcels, how many units you can build. We were just curious with your map. So we found, so we didn't look at the 840s because they really don't come with compliance. But we saw 378 parcels, and of them 293 compliant. I don't know if we have exactly the same numbers, but I think we'll be close. So this translated in the unit capacity of 1,648. And so we asked the question, how many, if you do the 10%, how many affordable units you'll get? So we think it's 27. 27 out of 1,648. So for every 62 units you build on this current proposal, you get one affordable. 1.6%. We're not close to 10%, it's dropping. If this takes off, as I think you hope to make a difference, right? To get affordable, to get housing going, this is like 1.6%. So it's very little. Then I looked at your incentive, 20% affordable, 1 in 5. How many do you need? How many people need to take this incentive? I can understand people don't like it, but how many do you need to take it? Everybody needs to take it to achieve that percent. Everybody. So I understand this is not affordable housing, we say it's not about it, but other towns do have affordable housing. Lexington, Newton, they actually satisfy MBTA requirements at 15% affordable housing, which gives you a cushion for other areas of town which may be producing units which are not affordable. So this is kind of like, this is a fact that other towns don't ignore affordable housing. They don't just create units and say we'll handle it in some other part of town. So, and the last thing I want to say here is, I think you should do a feasibility study for the is right, it's more important than doing the neighborhood. You have to do the feasibility study, and I'm not against making the laws compliant. And I don't think they should be multi-family, but you can make them compliant. All the good work you did, people should be able to build additions and all of that. Make them compliant. I think the affordable language is great. Maybe not the incentive, but it's good to have it. But don't rush it. Don't try to pass the neighbor something that has, I think, very little support in it.
So,
Thank you. Thank you. You obviously did a lot of work and update, and I appreciate that.
yeah, and right, we've always encouraged that partnership. And so I think when we looked at this map, this wasn't our preferred map. This was just asked to say, in this concept, what's the minimal needs, what's close. And so that's what we tried to.
Sorry, just one important point. What the law allows you is to have different sub-districts within that state. Even if you don't want to use the whole industrial or business area, you can have some of it and offset the downtown and have lower density downtown. 22 is too high, honestly. You have 20 in the smart growth district downtown. You have 22 around it. Why? You can use some of the other areas which are going lower at the moment and have lower density downtown. A sub-district can be under 15 and compensated by another area which is over 15 as long as the gross density is
Right, as long as they're conjoined. Yep.
So you should look into it because it is a logical approach.
So yeah, just to kind of remind all where we started, right? It was somewhere around here, right? This was our largest map proposal, and then it got shifted downwards. And as we tried to say, okay, maybe, right, if this was too broad and too dispersed, right, how do we kind of condense that down for the unit capacity, and then how do we condense that further, right, in this map iteration, which we hadn't talked about tonight, and then the minimal needs in this zoning concept, right, specific to this zoning concept.
So Andrew, you can use part of the industrial area in which
I know, I'm talking, right, but what we're talking about is this mixed residential concept, which I don't think the industrial zone is fitting for, of 22 units per acre, I think, right? It starts at that 35. Right, it starts at that 35. We had, right, in this iteration, right, this was more blue than down here because that's the existing A40 area in some directly abutting neighborhoods, and then, right, we had cut back down over here.
The last thing I wanted to say, sorry, I just wanted to say that I heard the argument, I actually heard it from you, how you want to retain control over large developments, and I think in a perfect world, yes, we should control, we should review everything. I think realistically, however, if a development abides to the zoning bylaw, like Pineville, you can change something on the margin, but at the same time, you cannot have a huge impact. However, if you go ahead with this path, and I hear you, maybe you're considering not the minimum, bigger, and so on. If you open the door to 40 BC even wider than it's now, then you really lost control. You lost control of, there's no zoning considerations, 40 B comes, and there's no zoning, and you get metropolitan on your street. So please take this into account. This control you have currently over business and industrial is a good thing, but the 40B is something that you need to be very careful.
Thank you. So sorry, just trying to think through.
So you went through the maps, right? Right, we sort of like juggling a couple of the different things here. So you showed the maps of the bigger, the middle, and the minimum zone there in terms of the multi-resident, the MR district as proposed, right? And there's a proposal here about using the primarily the industrial district and or the downtown business district. And I guess my question there is, you know, is there a combination that, like as she mentioned, right, like using that industrial district as a way to sort of, I'm going to say, cobble together a different approach, right? That maybe has a combination of some of what we talked about, but augments it with a different subzone in the industrial district. I guess, right, I'll start off by saying, right, personally, I think trying to open up the downtown area to by right residential, multifamily residential is not a healthy thing for the town. I think it would, we've worked hard over the past 20 years to try and maintain, right, small towns, right, always fighting a headwind to try and keep a downtown district viable. You know, maybe you think downtown is good or not, but right, a lot of work has gone into at least having, you know, some commercial district there. And I don't think that's the right thing for the town as a whole to allow more family, more residential there at the ground floor. That's my personal opinion, but would, you know, be interested in exploring the industrial district. I don't know how others feel.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to explore, right, the Eastern Gateway portion. I think I would say, right, the Market Basket Plaza, I would recommend not using for compliance in its sake, given its size, scale, and potential. In this, right, let's maybe consider that as a separate potential ideal development scenario. I don't want, right, these have been priority development areas, but we just haven't had the zoning considerations to a lot of them yet, right? So they've remained undeveloped. And so I don't argue that housing is likely to be a part of any potential unlocking development potential in and around these zones, industrial or business A. In 2019, we did look at business A and enacted the mixed use bylaw. And then obviously things happened in 2020 and things hit a stop, and then 2021 and so on. We've just gotten the first mixed use proposal there to see what that looks like. And we're hearing from the community on that one. That's the scale of housing that you're talking about up and down the corridor, though. It's 4-story denser development. And so especially when we start talking 15%, 20%, 25% affordability, that comes with just increased density, that even 35 units is hard to argue might be viable per acre at a 15%, right? So downtown is 25% requirements. We've seen developments closer to 60, 55, 60 units per acre. So, right, we modeled that concept at a high level, but when you try to think about getting development, right, there's a need for more housing. Right, it's not just compliance metrics, it's what can be built and what's plausibly built. So we always try to, so right, those are the floors for compliance, but in terms of built environment, you might see some areas like increase, and I'm happy to look at that, but right, at the end of the day, we're trying to promote the build, right, and housing stock. And so, right, we talk a lot about affordable units, capital A affordable units, but there are benefits that are hard to describe in short fashion of market rate units too, and especially those that come with lower development cost or pre-permitting costs and cost per unit to build it. And so it's a more, over time, it becomes a more naturally affordable stock that doesn't have to go through the deed restriction process and all these. So there's a lot of way I could go on a tangent on that whole thing forever. And all the case studies and everything we've read on that. But I just don't want right, capital A affordability to like be the only concept of affordable or good housing. So there is room for other things, and when we look at the commercial zones, we can build something that would promote a built environment that we think is meeting the intent of the community and what we've heard to date.
Other comments from the board before you?
Can I say something?
Just a minute.
Well, I'm one of the people who live closest to Market Basket.
Yeah.
But I have to say that I think for the town, keeping the industrial is probably a better option. If we wanted to have housing in the industrial area as an option for some sort of lifestyle center, I don't think putting it under the MBTA Communities Act would be the best choice. There are too many limitations under MBTA to get really what you want out of that type of area.
Means the law is the problem.
The law is definitely the problem. One of the reasons why we aim around the depot, around downtown, is because that's the older housing stock. If you really look at a lot of it is multifamily already. You've got 2 families, 3 families already built. You've got former multifamilies converted into singles. You've got lots that are smaller. They have a higher, far higher lot coverage than you'd expect today from any new development. So you're looking really at not a significant change in the character of neighborhood. I will say that there have been, I'm going to go with about 5 or even 6 2-family conversions where they've torn down an old 2-family that was in terrible condition and put up a brand new, modern, either duplex, usually a duplex 2-family. And that is, one of the people earlier asked who's going to get the benefits of this. And really the benefits go to the current landlord. They're the people who would be able, sure, a developer will come in, but for one of those properties, they paid $600,000 basically for the land. The house was falling down. They probably, if they tried to sell it as a single-family property, couldn't have gotten that. They might have gotten maybe half. But because it was a 2-family, they were able to get a reasonable amount of money for it, and the developer came in, built. Yes, he made a profit, but so didn't the owner of the property. And that's where I look at this, is like, I would rather the individuals in town get a benefit out of this than some big developer come in and go, oh, well, I'm going to buy up this huge lot and put up this ugly building. I won't call the Met an ugly building, but a large building that is not in character with the town because they can.
That's insulting.
Yeah, I do have a little something to say. I'll just share that some of the thoughts are on my mind. May I speak?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So what's on my mind, I'm not averse to using the industrial area, considering the industrial area as part of this. What's on my mind is that it is a requirement of the law, but it's also, I think, a good thing to do, is that the units that we make room for, that we zone for, are supposed to be family friendly and good for families with children. So, older people, younger people, and good for families with children. And maybe I'm suffering from a lack of imagination, but that corner of the industrial area and the strip of Business A down Main Street, I have a hard time envisioning that as a great place for families with children. So I could see playing around with it as a part of it, but not solely that. Thank you.
Just to add to, right, 60% of multifamily stock in Reading is 20+ units. And so we're at these opposite ends of spectrums in our development where we do a lot of high dense housing, right? Reading has done a great, debated or not, great job in downtown development and 40R development and mixed use apartment style development and single family development. There's just a severe lack of everything in between, and there's a lot of qualitative benefits to smaller scale multifamily housing, such as living in place, downsizing, variety variety of users, right? Young adults versus aging populations versus young starter family homes. And so what we want to try to promote through the concept is those smaller builds, right? And I'll just highlight Market Basket because that was highlighted in the concept. That's 20 plus acres. In Wakefield, your abutting community, similar development scale of 20 plus acres is 400 units on that size of parcels. So when we talk about right development rate and potentials there, it just starts to really skew, right? High pace, fast development, high dense, lots of units. And so when we get a lot of questions on school impact and rate of growth or things like that, or infrastructure, the higher dense just comes with the higher density, right? And potential for much more. So I don't want to say they're apples to apples, that Wakefield lot and the Reading site, but at that scale, that's something you can expect to.
If you expect high density there anyway, you expect to develop it as high density eventually, taking it time.
Yeah, I think with stronger commercial requirements and affordability requirements, which are a benefit to the town, it's gonna bring more traffic anyways.
Yes, the commercial brings more traffic, and one thing that didn't come up, you have a supermarket.
Can you, if you're gonna speak,
And we probably know what's.
yeah, you have other people. I really, we need.
Okay, I won't. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I didn't
Go
mean
ahead.
to like.
Yeah.
Just to speak on what you said, going back about who profits. I think we could say maybe many people profit from selling their two-family house that's falling apart. And you use that as an example. I know for sure where one of those properties was on the corner of Village and Green. They tore it down. They did sell the parcel for 600 because it was probably a tear down only anyways. It's beautiful. It's a duplex, two-family now.
I'm not saying it's not.
No, and that's not my point. My point is that in that sale, the owner did not live there. Two families were displaced. I actually helped advocate for one of the families who was a grandmother with raising her grandchildren, and she was very low income. And I helped with her to navigate the system so that she could find another home within Reading because she has children in the school system with special needs, all right? That being said, the developer did buy it for $625,000, I believe, and sold both sides for close to $900 each. So here, lots of people profited, but there were also some people that didn't. So I think when we talk about who's profiting, we gotta be really careful with that discussion because how do we really base that on? Like, you know, because there was two families that didn't profit, one very much not at all. And it was a scary time for them because she was afraid that they were going to become homeless. So that was my only point. We got to be really careful about like who profits because sometimes, you know, the developer in the end probably does profit the most. The homeowner does, but they're probably not, you know, if the house is in disarray, they're probably not going to get top dollar because it's going to be a short sale type of thing or it's a flip. So that was my only point. I just want to make sure that we're clear on that it's not always the property owner. And we have to think about too, if it's already a two-family, they might not be living there. There's other people living there. So we displace families too when we do that. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.
Hi, Julianne McKinney, and I'm at 67 Woodward Street. We've been there for 35 years. And I would give you guys a lot of credit for doing this work and, you know, to be working with something that's so unpopular. But I just wanted to say to put some people, some faces on the properties. Our home was built in 1815. We're a couple blocks from City Hall, Town Hall, and we do have a unit in our apartment, our house, so it's a two-family. But all of our abutters are single family. The people across the street, single family homes, beautiful old homes, and we qualify for 8 units. So can you imagine if we put 8 units? Like my husband and I, like we're getting old, we're not thrilled with the direction Reading's going. We can easily sell out and make a killing. We love that home, we raised our family there, it's an old, imperfect, big old house, and we hope that someone else will move in and love it like we do. But for 8 units to go in there, you totally have to tear that house down. So that's really, these are real people, and we could make a lot of money, but we don't really care about the money. We care about the town of Reading and the historic homes around us. And I just wanted to say, since when is the MBTA telling everybody what to do and what to zone? It's like, what's going on here? It's kind of crazy. And I'd just like to say that there are a lot of towns that are challenging this. I know that Holden is not.
So we don't have the time. We're not gonna have a conversation about whether we're not gonna have a conversation here about whether we're gonna fight it or not, because this board is gonna bring something to town meeting, and if you wanna have that conversation at town meeting,
No,
I encourage it. But,
I'm just saying
but
that
that's
we
the
don't have
forum.
to comply.
But this board is gonna propose something to town
I
meeting.
get that, but I just think a lot of people don't know what's going on, and there
Yeah.
are other solutions. So, thank you for your time.
I do want to note, right, there's the Reading, I guess, through past decisions, right, pretty much every property that gets developed, aside from a few in the industrial district, which is what makes that a really interesting proposal, but almost every property abuts a residential property. I mean, talk to the people on Pinevale Road right now, right? There's a residential development, probably exactly what would be proposed if you look at the multifamily along South Main Street, and there's been others, right? We cannot get away in this town from any development that goes in is going to impact a family. So like, I've been on this board, unfortunately, too long, for over 15 years. I can't tell you how many people, right, we sort of work through this and try and do the best we can. Development happens, and unfortunately, a lot of I'm going to say the community's problems were from past decisions where we just sort of let development happen on every square foot of town, right, in our commercial district. And that's why I said to begin with, like, I want to try and protect that commercial district, because that you get residential in there, and it then becomes even more difficult for anything to happen. It's just a fact of Reading that sort of like every property abuts a residential property. So no matter what we do here, right, to comply with MBTA communities, we will be having this conversation with the abutters. Now it's you, right? We could go and propose on Border Road, right? Down on Woburn, on the great place for multifamily housing, right? That community would be in here just like you guys. So.
Just a couple quick comments. And the first one is, we're within the half-mile district, half-mile radius of the station, and we do not have to. And being downtown, being there for 35 years, seeing the changes, seeing that it was a beautiful Victorian that had a fire about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and they put up a prefab duplex, which is horrible. Someone came by and did that tore down, I think it was a turn of the 19th century, early 18th century home that was in the corner. It was a beautiful old house, not in great shape. They tore that down, put in a hideous triplex with pressure treated treated front porches and steps that are still there. It's one of the worst houses in the neighborhood right now. And we don't have aesthetic police, we don't have architectural police, we don't have any of that here.
We don't want it.
Well, I'm not arguing that point, but we don't have them, so
Yeah.
people put in almost whatever they want, whatever it looks like. And my wife spoke, we have a big lot, we can get 8 or 10 units in it. I can't imagine how that would affect the neighborhood if we had a 10-foot setback going up 25 feet. It would be a disgrace. And that's what, that's the thing that bothers me the most, is that the historical nature of downtown is going to be decimated. Not this year, not next year, but over the next 10 years. And anything that we do that allows that to happen is short-sighted. We do not want to eviscerate our history. We don't want to hide it. We should talk about it. We should celebrate it. And that goes to the architects. And the neighborhood.
Thank you.
So you gotta spread this out. And
Yep.
it's the only thing that you can do is to spread out the pain.
You in brownish? Is that what you, yeah.
Gennady Justin, Green Cardinal. So I heard quite a lot of different comments. I've attended all the meetings for MBTA except for the last comment here. And I heard a lot of comments from different folks stating that they want a larger zone, they want a smaller zone. They want a zone like kind of over here or spread all throughout the town. And I just want us to manage our expectations here, because all those comments are coming from people who want what's best for our town. It's just that we have slightly different, all of us have slightly different views as to what that actually entails. So, given that, I think we need to go into this with an understanding that we will have to make some compromises with one another here and there to address this law. We may agree that the law is not ideal. The state certainly could have done a better job. This is the hand we've been dealt. So we need to be addressing that. I wanted to comment that I love your enthusiasm about developing the industrial. So I genuinely do it. I would love to see something beautiful being done with it. With regards to allowing MBTA to dictate that, though, that would be one of my reservations. So we were to zone Market Basket, for example. We would have maybe 300-400 units pop up. I'm not exactly sure what it is. And Reading would also be using the grocery store. So we have to next to Market Basket, the ground Market Basket. So my assumption was that because it's a single block of land, you either have it serving as an industrial or as a.
No, it's an overlay. You can keep the industrial as an option on top of it.
I just want to remind all the industrial zone requirements are not conducive to development, which is why you've got it. I know.
And why can't you make it beautiful?
I think we can. I think we can. It's just, do we want
I
it
think it makes
of housing only in compliance with this and incentives for more, or do we want to focus it on other areas of need that the town has? And so that's right, the debate around the zone. Yes, it's,
I would too love to make it more beautiful. I agree with you. I want to see something that's very useful in that area. The other caveat to this is the business district, business strip that we have there. Some folks, some of the business owners don't own, they lease. We hear this all the time. So I apologize to forget your name. You talked about a family that was displaced. Those business owners, small business owners, would be experiencing something very similar to. A developer might roll in, and if you have a little single floor business there, it's significantly more profitable for a developer to construct a multifamily home there. We're in housing crisis, right? And this stuff is expensive, and they make bank. I agree with you there. So we just need to be a little bit careful and think about the repercussions of where we zone. There isn't one single answer. I'm sure it's going to be a mix of different ideas that we've all talked about tonight. But again, I would advocate for the community to go into this thinking that we're not going to get everything that we want. That's all.
Thank you.
I have a question, and thank you, Gannett, because it made me think of the question. I have a question about the portion of the industrial zone proposal. So you're proposing that entire lot, that Market Basket and the liquor store and some vacant places, that all gets zoned as mixed residential, right?
So if you look at what other towns do, for example, they put this overlay, which is compliant with MBTA on top of businesses, gas stations, banks, strip malls. If you look at North Andover, they put it on top of a Market Basket and North Andover mall, and also some business park. So it is allowed, Newton also putting it on top of commercial properties and overlay. You don't change what's the basis. If you don't like your industrial, and I think obviously it's not very viable, because I think good has happened, at least recently, and as I said, it's a priority development area. You need to help it. You can change the base zone. You can make industrial better and more attractive to businesses. So what the other towns are doing, they're doing an overlay, which is MBTA compliant, so it's a choice. If you look at Main Street, some buildings are not mixed use. The one across from Pineville, it's just apartments. So obviously that's allowed, that's happening. The reason we put this forward is because you look at what's happening already, those buildings are coming one way or another. So you have 36 units on Pineville on 1 acre. That's the density we brought up, 35. Woburn is doing mixed-use developments at 35 and 40, depending on the percentage commercial. So this number is not just put out in there. This number is what's happening today. So we are going to see high-density housing around Market Basket eventually.
I understand, and I guess my question is, and maybe it's one for Andrew, is that's allowed? I thought in order to be compliant, we had to allow just solely mixed use by right, so it would be redevelopment, solely residential by right.
Right.
Multi-family residential.
Right, so if you did mixed use there, you could only do it for a portion of the development site and requirement of the unit capacity. So you're just hamstrung to then incentivize commercial or mixed use. And so just for example, right, Lexington, in the district where at least 50% of the building floor area on the lot is occupied by non-residential principal uses, in other words, commercial uses, the maximum height allowed is 115 feet, where 52, 40, and 75, it's just right. The bases are 52, 60, 40, and 70. But to incentivize the commercial and mixed use, they're saying we have to go above and beyond to get commercial tax base and commercial uses. And so you do that through height, density, or less affordability. And so it's hard to get it all in one lot. The mixed use bylaw as it stands today is pretty tough to develop to. We have a lot of stringent requirements on commercial activity, commercial space, and commercial parking, which then drives up density. And so
I think that's why towns are choosing to use overlays. They still keep the zoning which was there, which allows.
you just don't see the difference of underlying or overlay. The use would be allowed and the development is going to be incentivized regardless. And if housing is incentivized, that's likely what's to be built.
So I think the answer to my question is, okay, it's worth looking into and it's confusing. We should just be mindful of what we are getting and what we are losing. Thank you very much. I know there are a lot of people who want to talk.
People that haven't spoken yet, I think, anyone? No? Oh.
Well, I'm right back to this meeting. Right, hello, somebody's figured out again. So I made a few notes here, I'm gonna try to get through them quickly. The smaller zone that presenting tonight, right, I just wanna answer on that. So what is the, what's the exact number of developable acres number of lots, and the maximum number of multi-family units that could be built on that? Are we actually at the minimum that's the smallest?
So we're at the minimum and near minimum in terms of compliance. We're required a 1,500 unit capacity. This is closer to 1,900. And the density is still just above the 15 units per acre. I haven't run the full analysis. I have like the spreadsheet on existing counts for some of the larger maps. I didn't run that for this specific map. But of course, those numbers start to lessen. But
okay, so that's just out of curiosity. That's smaller.
But
this small map here.
It's
It's now at a
87.
lesser density of 15 units per acre.
So across the district, it's 16.4, but that 22 units per acre on a lot still applies. But the developable acres are reduced to 87 in the near minimal compliance.
Okay. And I'll put that to you. That 87 can't, I mean, that 1,900 can't be reduced down to 1,500.
We can try to get it to 1,500. It's just right then what is
I'm just
stretched
wondering,
out.
I'm not suggesting that.
Yeah.
So, I was looking at like what do people want, and you talk about mixed use and trying to save the commercial, save the industrial zone for something. It's been nothing for like so long. It's been nothing since I moved here. I mean, there used to be a frugal Fanny's here. I don't know, that's been gone for 20 years or 15 years. I mean, really, we just look at that lot. But, so I looked at, you've been telling, I've heard it over and over and over and over again. The reason this circle's been drawn for all the housing that's been put in this one multi-family zone is because that's what the town said they wanted, correct?
So, I mean, it's a combination of that and where we felt that the forms and scales were appropriate, that the distance to amenities were there, there's ample open space that residents could access in walking distance, the library, schools, parks, downtown commercial districts, so it was, and the transit too. So it's a combination of many things.
All right, but I looked at the survey results, the housing production survey, I think it's just approved in 23, but 2022, and there were only 3 questions that had to do with multifamily housing and housing density, right? So one was the simple question, do you support the following development types in Reading? All right, I mean, only 32% supported multifamily housing, right? So I'm just skipping what people supported. It was minimal.
Yep.
Only 23% supported a subdivision with smaller lots. So multifamily housing isn't a popular idea anywhere in town. Nonetheless, it needs to be built, right? So here's what comes in, what's interesting. I would support increased housing density in the following areas. This is question 34. Check all that apply. And the #1 choice was industrial zoning district. Okay, now that's at 54%. Okay, it beat out within a half mile of the train station, not by much. 403 to 376 respondents, 54 to 51%. But the other thing that's interesting about that is it says that within the half mile of the train station, I took that survey myself, okay? And what I thought that meant to me, or what that meant to me, was what I see down, in downtown the train station. The E-Mark building on Gold Street, the Chronicle building, the Postmark building. That's what I think that question is asking me. Not, where would you like to see 22 units per acre built? Like that, those are 2 separate questions, right? So I'm not sure, I would give even more weight. If I were interpreting the survey, I'd give more weight to the fact that the townspeople said, hey, you know what? We're fine with you we support multifamily housing down in the industrial zone, right? It gets even more interesting because question number 35 now says, I would support increased housing density if it were part of a mixed-use development. So they were giving the choice. Do you support it without do you support it without the mixed use? Do you support it with mixed use? And, the numbers went up slightly, right? It went from 54% to 61%. They said, yeah, we also support it with that. Like, my feeling from reading this is, yeah, people in town are kind of fine with like shoving whatever you need to shove down in the industrial zone. So now it becomes a question of like, well, what would really go down there, right? I mean, we can't keep a business, even like we have a Halloween store that comes in for a month. We've had a gym come and go, Frugal Fannies came and go. Nothing, a playground place I think is gone, right? That's probably gone. I mean, they come, they go. We can't keep it, it's hard keeping businesses in town, even if they're down there. So, I'm like all for like, put as much housing as you can down there that makes sense. Make something beautiful down there. Even if you can't put all of it down there. You know, if you can take half of that away, that would make a huge difference. Right, it would be, really, I mean, what I would like to see is a serious proposal, like the amount of work you put into the first proposal. I think and like many other people here, and maybe even the town meeting members, you know, who will be voting on this, and I truly hope that they don't just say, hey, it's not in my neighborhood, great, let's check that off, right? Which is what I fear. But I would really like to see another proposal, like something different, but I want to see it, like, you know, I'm hearing you say, well, it's a problem because we do this, we do that, we do this. That big map you came up with, this small map is a problem. Like, it involves a lot of concessions. All the zoning, all the dimensional controls have got to be changed. The parking, I mean, you can stick to your 1 point, you know, my one car and a scooter is going to work in this neighborhood. I don't think it will, right? Like, it's going to put us way behind on affordable housing. There's no way that, you know, it's just going to put us way behind on affordable housing. It's will open up a whole town to it. And then you're going to have to like build housing down in Walker's Brook anyway, right? Like, it's going to have to go somewhere if you have to catch up with 300, 400 units. So I'm asking you, if you give us a serious zoning proposal that has a zoning proposal that works, right? Something else to, you know, instead of us coming up here arguing and fighting for our cause.
We're not arguing, right? We are not arguing.
No, I know,
right?
Right.
So, right, there's a lot of work that, as you mentioned, a lot of work that goes into this, right? We need to start somewhere, right? And this is where we started, right? We planned on having public meetings, getting lots of great input like you've provided and others have provided. This is the process, right? I heard that Milton, the town, or are they a city? I think they're a town. The town of Milton went through 37 different concepts. That is mind-boggling to me, and I can tell you that we're not going to go through 37 different concepts, right?
I'm not asking
But I will say, right, like we're taking this in, right, and right, obviously what you saw the first time is not what you saw the second meeting, and I guess this is the second meeting, right, and it won't be what you see the third meeting, right? I mean, we've heard clearly, at least I have, that, you know, that there's interest in the industrial district, seeing what we can do there, right? Seeing if there's other parts of town. It does take a while to get this. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So,
but I would like to see a fleshed out proposal, like something that, you know,
Yeah.
I don't think you don't have to have all the meetings where people try to stick a bush on a little 0.18 acre lot or see if they can get a strip of grass. We just want to see the numbers, something else, something that involves something other than, you know, just the neighborhoods here.
Something that will enhance our town.
Yeah, something that will.
So we can have a whole nother group of people come in and we'll have that conversation, which I encourage. Not saying no about it, but
if you're talking Walker's Brook Drive, there's very, you know, here where you're talking 1,500, 1,900 homes, okay? I don't know, I mean, Walker's Brook Drive, it's minimal amount of houses. I mean, there's a few, like you said, I absolutely agree, it's always going to affect someone. But there has to be a happy balance in there that involves more than 22 units an acre. I mean, like, even reducing that, like, if you can get, you know, like, maybe you can't fit all the housing here, right? But that would reduce the density in the, you know, around the downtown. Like, it would make me happy.
I think we hear you. Yeah,
okay.
we hear you.
All right. So,
In the back?
okay. May I just ask one more question? sort of related, but unrelated to zoning. At the Zoom meeting, there was that big developer, Lewis.
Yep, he's from real estate.
That way, and it was a little disturbing to me that I don't think he's a resident in town, is he?
I did not fact check that.
Okay, he's Synergy's a big developer in Winchester. And I was a little disturbed that he was sitting in on that meeting, but I'm like, I guess it's a open meeting, I thought it was for residents. But it was disturbing that he actually asked, he said, well, it's a problem for us developers that the lot values in this area, as you were saying, like, hey, they got money for the lot, the house was worth up. He said the lot values are slightly prohibitive, or I forget how he worded it, to us, like storming in there, basically. And he did the right thing and said, yeah, you caught me on that on the side, because I don't think it was the place for him. But I was actually kind of curious as to, I don't know, what did you say to him? I mean, I'm not.
No, I mean, I think, right, a lot of their group and a lot of real estate groups and development groups, Nordblum, others, were looking for across 177 municipalities, who's allowing the most and highest uses, and in this current proposal, it is not Reading. Let's assure you of that. So.
But I was just sort of curious as to why he even asked, like why he asked, like, yeah, the land values are a little high for us. What can you? And
yeah,
I'm not suggesting that anyway. Like that.
Right. I'm an open book.
Yeah.
But
I just couldn't even understand. I couldn't understand why he was there and why he was asking that question.
Right. I mean, they're saying the cost of housing and the cost of land and the cost of development is so extraordinarily high due to existing market constraints because of the existing zoning patterns of many towns that the cost to develop 3 units or 4 aren't always there for like lot sizes of need, right? And so they're saying, right, we'd rather people try to do 50 units per acre because that's what the market is calling for in its current standing. And we're saying, I can't sell that, right?
I really couldn't understand the point. Thank you.
Yep.
Jennifer Hillary, Hillcrest Road, sorry, you are. I do see that you're really taking to heart the comments by the public, even from last week's meeting to this. With this slide, I see you're hearing us and researching these issues, so I really appreciate it. As I was sitting here tonight listening to the concerns again about our historic districts and buildings, and hearing last time your comments about how there are opportunities and ways to protect various historic buildings in town, it just can't be done within the confines of the zoning per se, except for choosing not to have zoning in historic districts, right? If you can, sort of choosing.
Right. I wouldn't say that excludes the historic districts from redevelopment, right? No, but you can choose whether to include them in any zone or not in this iteration.
Right. So by not including historic districts in particular zones for mixed residential, you are in fact protecting them.
In some aspects.
Yes.
I mean, there are multi-families in the historic districts already.
Of course, I'm not saying that.
Yeah,
No,
so like I'm not protected, right? This doesn't protect them from being torn down for a new single family, but I guess they couldn't do whatever 22 units per acre on lot if they're not in the zone, but they could do a new single family.
Absolutely, absolutely. My point is, I'm seeing tonight that where MBTA was lacking in protecting opportunity for affordable housing, we came up with parallel bylaws to make sure that affordable housing is part of the MBTA equation. So what I'm querying is, could we have parallel bylaws to protect historic homes or more so that we pass at the same time to show that we're hearing the concerns folks have about historic. And maybe this committee is not the one who would work on those, but is that something you could do?
think when it comes to historic assets, right, you're not gonna get the protection in the zoning, but the historic, right, historic districts, historic inventory and zoning are all their own individual regulations, and sometimes they just happen to work in concert with each other in terms of uses allowed and site plan reviews or historic exterior reviews. There are so many other tools outside of restrictive zoning, right, because that can be a tool to try to prohibit development on the lots is overly restrictive zoning. But there are many other tools to say we'd rather you reuse these and revitalize these things in a more improved fashion. And so that's what we would rather focus on, because there's a need for both, right? There's a need for housing, and if the zone happens to cross historic inventories, let's try to make sure we can revitalize and reuse them rather than just saying tear down is the best option. So that comes through tax incentives, that comes through local grant opportunities, that comes with a potential for our RMLD partnership for energy efficiency improvements for those regulated on the historical inventory, that we could say, hey, if we have this inventoried property, would you consider further subsidizing lower rates, better opportunities for energy efficiency? It's their goals of, right, units and blanking on the term, condensed heat pumps, air condensed heat pumps, and all these things that we can apply to those structures if we can incentivize reuse of them rather than tear down. But that doesn't happen through zoning. There's all costs and tax and policy associated.
So I'll say it because I don't think Andrew will, right? Like, right, there's a bandwidth issue here, right? As we just talked about, trying to, make sure that this particular proposal, which is big and important, right? Not the proposal in front of us, but this MBTA communities thing, right? Big and important. Personally, I want Andrew to focus on getting that right. I do know that he's said in other meetings that he and his team, after this is over, will focus on sort of improving some of those historic district regulations, and I am confident that the folks that are involved in the historic district heard him and will hold his feet to the fire on that. I just personally wouldn't. I'm glad that he's not saying that he'll take that on at the same time.
I agree with that, and I also want to throw something out to everybody. And I hope this isn't insulting, but I think it's not necessarily a productive thing to do to assume that historic structures are incompatible with like 2 or 3 or more family buildings. I mean, down on Beacon Hill, a lot of truly historic old homes are now multifamily condominiums. You wouldn't know it from the street. So going hand in hand with the bandwidth is, I think that's something that needs to be thought through really carefully, and to not necessarily assume that by putting 2 or 3 units in a historic building, you're going to lose the historic character. So yeah.
I live next to, I've lived in the same house now for over 20 years, directly diagonal from me. I knew it was more than 1 or 2 units. I happened to look in recently, and it's 5, there's 5 units in a historic house. It actually was moved from the center of town. I don't know if there's any folks on it. It was picked up and moved from the center of town down Lowell Street and put on its site right now. It's historic, and there's 5 units out in there. I've lived next to it for 20 something years, and I did not know that. Right? Like, you don't always, it doesn't scream. What?
You don't know your neighbors.
I do know, I know some of them that come and go, right? I didn't know there was 5 units in there, right?
They're peaceful.
They are peaceful. They're very peaceful.
I want to be very clear. I don't dispute
Yeah.
any of your statements, but I'm thinking, how do we garner the most support for what's coming down the pipe? And if folks who are concerned about historic character have assurance that our town has made provisions to do so, I think that would garner more support. So I was thinking to pass the buck.
No,
This is of
no.
interest to
Yeah.
Listen, I look forward to that work. We just gotta get to John's point through this, and that's been our priority. Thank you.
And I would argue maybe there's other folks in town who would like to.
Oh, I'm sure.
Spearhead that,
Yep.
so, thank you.
Thanks.
And it's kind of where, right, sometimes we do operate in the unknown, right? Our density allowances might say 8 units on your lot, but when you factor in all the dimensional controls, it's hard at this point to know if that maximum of 8 is achievable. And right, I'm sure somebody could try and see what that looks like, but we just, because these development styles aren't, I guess, proactive in Massachusetts, right? They're not allowed anywhere, smaller multifamily housing, they're not allowed in a lot of areas, I should say. Not anywhere, but in a lot of areas, there's not a lot of comparables for us to make to find what is the right development pattern. So we're focused on the majority 5 units or less to keep the scales smaller. It's on those larger lots, that 15% of lots that are a half acre or more that could allow for more. It's through the floor area where those 8 units actually fit in the constrained structure of 30%. And that's what we don't fully know until we start to see applications and track through history and permitting through that. So we can average floor areas and setbacks and all these things, but it all comes into the built environment, just like parking, just like sewer. It all comes to what's actually built. Do we start to see patterns and recognition of these things in real time? So.
Joe Granahan, Middlesex Ave. I actually had a question about the earlier, this is relating to the proposal considering the industrial district. And in particular, there's been a bunch of discussion about the One General Way, which is the property that has Market Basket and Liquor Junction and 87 vacant units. So this is a question about zoning. When we do zoning, can zoning split a property, like, because it sounds like, I think, someone said, that if we rezone that, we lose Market Basket. And someone else said, oh, no, we don't. But I'm pretty sure we do. I mean, the proposal I saw in the Post had the zoning going past New Crossing Road. And if it is possible to knock down Market Basket and build 400 apartments on that whole thing, I would assume it would be very lucrative to do so, and therefore someone would do it. But hypothetically, it sounds like the presumption is actually that we could zone, I don't know, right past the smokestack there to cut off Market Basket. Is that even a thing, or is that not a thing? All of One General Way would be, it's a single property, so it's owned by a single whoever.
So in the law, you can't split zones, nor would we ever recommend splitting zones. It leads to a litany of issues and split zone considerations and all this confusion. And so in any new district boundaries, I will never propose a split zone law.
I mean, I get the arguments for using that. I think, to me, the most compelling thing about the newer proposal is that is the capital A affordable housing concern, where we have a choice. We can either the initial proposal we've gone through, where we take a neighborhood that has a lot of multifamilies in it, and we just make that legal. That's probably a minimal change in terms of introducing anything that's different from what we have today. It also gets us nothing with respect to affordable housing inventory, because we get a bunch of 2, 3, 4, 5 unit places with no affordable ones at all. If we actually want to, require 10% of anything, and that's kind of more than 10 of something, and we're talking big. So I'm, intrigued by this idea of like some really honking big buildings that have a lot of affordable units. I know a lot of people hate the really honking big buildings that we just built, but it is a trade-off.
Just how honking big they would actually have to be in order to comply. That's got to be one scenario that we run through to say, at the very least, we said, okay, we're not going to touch a single family property. We're going to try to do this entire thing on commercial and industrial and whatever. And if we did that, how big are these big buildings? Are they 11 stories? Are they 22 stories? Or are they 6 stories? And reasonable. We least tell the townspeople,
Six is-
hey, we tried, it doesn't work, there's no way that that can be compliant, and we have to go into the neighborhoods to
For
do
full compliance in the district, you look at a base of 50 units per acre or even upwards of 65 units per acre allowed by right. And so for full compliance in terms of density and unit capacity in any of the business zones alone, you're looking at 50 units plus per acre. And then when you factor that in, right, that's likely 4 to 5 stories, potentially up to 6. So
I don't care about the units per acre.
a lot of
I care
people do.
about how big the buildings are, because that's gonna have the biggest impact on the neighborhoods and the neighbors, right? If we go in there and say, hey, look, we can make this compliant with a 6-story building, you know, then people can at least argue that. They can say, okay, that's compliant, but
What did they do
I
at
don't
the
like-
post office? How many?
No, so nobody at home can hear you all.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if Joe is done talking.
I wasn't quite, but I will just leave with the whole, so personally, you know, I live in, in these larger and medium maps, but not the minimal map. I moved from West Street into the library neighborhood so that I could walk to commercial things downtown. You know, I spend more than I want to think about a Cafe Nero and, you know, go to half and half for breakfast every weekend, and it's good that I can walk home from Monterey. So like, this would kind of, it sounds like keeping this to only our business things would obliterate all commercial in Reading, because it would be more profitable for the, you know, the people who own the building Monterey's in or whatever to be like, nope, you know, I could get this much rent from, you know, Eilish, or I could get way more if I built a 6-story apartment building here. And that would be it. I would live downtown and there would be nowhere for me to walk to, except the train station itself.
Thank you.
But you can't, that's the thing.
So it's 10:20. We've covered a lot of ground here. You know, I'd like to close this up at 10:30, no later than 10:30. I think that seems like a reasonable time.
I'm happy to repeat what I said.
That's fine. I think for folks that couldn't hear what the speaker had said before, right, there was essentially a request for us to take a look at what the, I think focused on the industrial district, or really any of the districts that were proposed, on like when we talk about, you know, what it would take to use that as the full district. What are we talking about? How big are the buildings? You know, right? What would we be talking about so that we can sort of like evaluate that versus the proposal that
In
is in
essence,
the
that's
residential?
correct. I would like to suggest that the industrial area be considered, the South Main Street corridor be considered, and any of the existing multifamily that is already built around the train station, if that could be considered, mostly because we know that 40% has to be within that half mile. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say, let's use that if it's at all possible in any way, shape, or form, because it's already right close to the train station and it would qualify for the half mile radius. But then try to focus the whatever we can't get out of what's there, focus the remainder of that on that South Main Street corridor, and maybe that corridor is 3 stories, and then what we do in the industrial area is 6 stories, and the combination of all 3 gets us to compliance. Something along those lines, where we can then go back to the community and say, hey, look, we know that nobody wants this, right? And I agree that your point is, you know, if you draw the map anywhere, some people are gonna be happy and other people are gonna be unhappy. And this has the potential to put pit neighbors against neighbors, neighborhoods against neighborhoods. And if I was a town meeting member, and I hope to be, I could not in good conscience vote in favor of this, because it disproportionately puts the burden of this on some areas, and other areas don't have anything. to consider. I couldn't do that to my family residence, so this is why I say this option, at least just to consider, is an important one, because if it doesn't work, if there's no way that we could do that, and we can at least tell everybody, there's no way we could do that unless, you know, or if we did that, we'd have to do 11 and 12 and 15-story buildings to make it work. Then they can all say, yeah, that's no way, I don't want that, let's find another solution. And at least you demonstrated that you tried.
Yeah, no, and I hear you, and it's why we started out at the largest map we felt viable to, again, spread that opportunity hit and chance and impact, if you want to say impact too. And so we started there because we felt cognizant of not fitting one northeast area versus less on the southwest. And so that's what we were trying to avoid. I do say, right, a lot of people we keep hearing, it's a condensed area, it's a condensed area. We're talking hundreds of acres and hundreds of lots. And I hear what you're saying, right? It's in one general area of town, but it's not as condensed as you might feel, right? Like downtown is 43 acres and has hundreds of units developed alone. Reading Woods is a small handful of acres with 400 units on it in and of itself. So when we talk condensed area, I don't think that our map proposal was as condensed as some others may feel personally. We did try to spread that as far as we could in remaining in what we felt were viable criteria. But that was, again, my proposal.
So any comments or questions sort of bringing up topics that were discussed?
I just have one. Quick one, sorry.
I can grab your name. I don't think we grabbed it the first
Rick
time.
Schaefer, 67 Wood. And you said something that I thought was very interesting, that is a historical house nearby that has 5 units. Is there any way to allow additional units to be built within the confines of the current structure?
Sorry, I missed the question.
I'm sure there is, but it
Our zoning
doesn't,
allow
it doesn't fit within this zoning.
Right.
Well, no. Well, we can change the zone. And that's my question. Instead of looking at, say, a single family on 5,000 square feet, okay, they would have to tear it down to get 3 units out of it. Is there some way that theoretically the envelope of that house could be turned into 3 units without changing the exterior of the house, so that we don't kill the historical nature of the neighborhood? But it's a question. That's
It's
why
a question.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would agree.
It would be beautiful. I think we need to think about that a little bit. I'm not so sure that can work within the discussion.
Sorry, lights turn off at 10:30. He's standing at the panel he's standing at the panel just in case.
But yeah, that's a good idea. We will. All right. Thank you, folks.
I just want to remind everybody, at least our next pre-planned hearing date is Monday, February 5th. There's no notice that goes out on that, just Monday, February 5th. I think we'll probably plan to hold it here again, given the signs, so if we can.
So I think I need a motion.
Oh, I move to adjourn.
But you have to move to continue the hearing.
Just a minute, please. So we move to continue this hearing to December 5th.
February 5th. 2024.
That would be February 5th, 2024.
Do we need to do this roll call or
Not if we only do the.
if we just do these 4 numbers? Sorry, Tom.
No offense, guys.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right. Motion to
Motion
adjourn.
to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor? All right.
Mark, Tom, thank you. Everyone on Zoom, thank you.
Thank you.